Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin. It is September 10th, 2024, and we are covering a really, really important topic today. We're covering divorce within a Mormon context, and we're going to ask the question, can there be a healthy Mormon/ex-Mormon divorce? Is that even possible? Is it worth striving for? And joining us today to talk about not only her experience getting a divorce as a Mormon/ex-Mormon, but also she is also counseled at least some people as sort of a divorce coach. And she's working towards her certification as a licensed therapist in Utah. Her name is Meg or Megan Campbell. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
You go by Meg or Megan? Which do you
usually
prefer?
Meg.
Okay. Thanks for joining us, Meg.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. And if that weren't awesome enough, we also have Margi with us as co-host. Hey, Margi.
Yes. Hello.
Glad to have you.
Thank you.
And we have a third co-host today. We're tripling up on you.
I love it.
But Julia Sanders is joining us remotely. Hey, Julia.
Hi, everyone.
And the reason why Julia is joining us is because, Julia is a part of the Mormon Stories team, but she's recently been through a divorce. And as we were sort of getting ready today, I just thought she would add value. And Julia, you consented, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah. So, and those of you who know my story know that my parents were divorced when I was in middle school, and they were devout Temple married Mormons. And my dad's been married 5 times. My mom's been married 3. So I know a little bit about divorce as the kid of multiple divorces. And then finally, just to make this relevant, we see a lot of divorces in the progressive and post-Mormon space. Now, people like to blame divorce. Sometimes faithful Orthodox Mormons like to blame divorce on people losing their faith or leaving the church. And maybe we can address that at some point today, but we see that as bunk. Now, sometimes people who probably shouldn't have gotten married or didn't in the first place, or didn't get good training on how to have healthy relationships, they get divorced. And, but I don't think that's any podcast fault or even losing the faith's fault, or maybe even the Mormon church's fault. I think divorce is just a reality of life. And of course, when people make major changes, that's going to potentially upset the marriage contract. But regardless, I have been seeing a lot of divorces, even with close friends and some family. And so we want to cover it on Mormon Stories. So that's what today's about. We like to give everyone a chance to kind of state an intention. So Meg, if you want, do you want to maybe share with us why you were wanting to do this episode?
Yes, absolutely. I'm very excited to be here. And it's so funny, would have never, 10 years ago, seen myself as somebody just really advocating for both doing and viewing divorce differently.
Yeah.
But after I've worked in education for a long time, I've seen a lot of divorce of students and families. And then kind of at that crossroads of, working as a teacher for so many years, witnessing divorce of, friends, families I work with, and then my own divorce, I became really invested in doing divorce differently than I'd seen it the majority of my adult years. I really wanted a child-centered divorce. I wanted to believe my kids would be okay, and that divorce wasn't necessarily this life-defining failure, but maybe a new beginning. And I've just since become really passionate about just discussing divorce more openly, and hopefully supporting others reframe it a little bit. And that's not to say, I have some people who are like, you're so pro-divorce. And I feel like I'm not pro-divorce. But if that's where your family's at, I'm very pro handling it with grace and with gratitude and with emotional intelligence and right, setting up all family members to both heal and thrive.
Yeah.
And it's not inevitably this really negative, bad, just failure. So I'm
love
excited
that reframe.
to talk about it.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, as the child of a divorce, I started Mormon Stories with the intention of eliminating divorce as it relates to religion. And I learned pretty quickly that divorce shouldn't be stigmatized, that there is such thing as a healthy or a good divorce, and that the goal shouldn't be to prevent divorce. It should be to have marriages be as healthy as they can be. And if there needs to be a divorce, or if it's healthy for there to be a divorce, that the divorce be as healthy as it can be. And so we have to be able to walk that line of being pro-marriage,
yes,
but also pro other options if that's just what's healthiest for the people.
Yes, agreed. You said that so well.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're going to begin. And so this is going to be a little bit different in that we're not going to spend a lot of time on Meg's early years or adolescent years. We're going to kind of jump right to the marriage. And then start talking about how the divorce happened. And then, the focus of today is going to be on, the conflict, the divorce, and then the resolution, and then maybe any tips. Is that okay?
Yes, that sounds great.
Okay. But we should have a tiny bit of background. So I'll just ask a few kind of rapid fire questions if that's okay.
Yes.
And Julie, you jump in whenever you want. So were you and your husband sort of both born in the church and kind of raised in the church?
Yes, both grew up Mormon, raised in the church. Yes.
Okay. So anything really crucial to your story about, let's just say, either of your childhoods or your adolescent, early adult years that end up playing really important factors in the conflict and the divorce that you want to state, either about you or your husband?
I think this one actually applies a little bit to both of us in the sense that we were both raised Mormon, both just believed in the sense that we were told to believe and didn't question, but we were never, neither of us were just very, I never just loved the church. I never loved, it was like this box I was always trying to fit in, but wasn't ever comfortable in. So I just felt like I knew this was I should be doing this. And I feel like that's relevant. I feel like somehow how hard I tried to make it work, only to then realize I don't believe it at all. I think there's got to be some correlation to how angry I was. Same with my husband. I think there was a lot of resentment, feelings of being deceived. I think it'd be one thing if I was like, I loved that path. I appreciate it. And I've gotten to a place where I can appreciate a lot about it, but I never felt very comfortable in that space, just that there was something I was missing, something I was doing wrong. So I always tried, to be a good, faithful Mormon, but it never felt comfortable, or I never felt like I belonged there, but I tried so hard to make it work. And I think that would be the piece that later came back to make me at least pretty resentful.
And Meg, Meg, did you say you and your ex-husband felt that way, or was it just you?
No, both of us. Him probably even more. He always pushed back growing up. He didn't serve a mission, which was a big deal in Cache Valley, Utah, where he graduated high school and chose not to go on a mission. So when we started dating I was 20 years old, he would have been happy to probably just kind of fall away, become inactive. But I was adamant, we had to turn it around at some point. We had to get married in a temple, and he conceded, but I was definitely more we need a temple marriage. So he was always more comfortable, pushing back a little bit.
On the one hand, I can, there's some people that want to blame divorce on the people, you weren't faithful enough, or you didn't try hard enough, just like they like to blame, people who lose their faith. They never believed in the first place, or they didn't try hard enough, or they never had a testimony. And I can hear some of those people who are watching thinking, oh, okay, well, he didn't serve a mission, and both of you didn't feel super comfortable as Mormons always. So there it is. That's why the divorce happened. But the truth is, I think most Mormons inside, if they're honest, aren't always feeling great about everything. I know as devout as I was, and I checked all the boxes, things never felt quite right to me. So I just want to say, I don't think that discredits you guys.
Thank you. And I think it just adds another layer of just that kind of perma-dissonance, right? Like I'm trying so hard to check all the boxes, and it's going to fall into place one day, and it will make sense. And yeah, in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I can see why that didn't happen for me, but it did. I feel like through adolescence, especially, like it came at the expense of some self-esteem, right? Like I wasn't a knower, but tried just so hard to have faith and do the things that I was supposed to, and didn't question.
Do you want to share a little bit more about that? You were saying I wasn't a knower. Do you want to kind of share the story behind that?
Oh, sure.
Really quickly.
Yes. So just in the various, I think the church has moved away from worthiness interviews from what I've heard, but I definitely participated in those growing up, and just the various questions. I remember a handful of times I would try to just I'm going to be honest. Like I'm curious. And when I would get asked about, what's the question? Do you believe Joseph Smith was a prophet, or have a testimony of Joseph Smith? I can't even remember, but things like that, where I would just answer honestly, like, I'm not sure. I don't know. And my perception at the time was I was missing something, right? Like, well, are you reading your scriptures every day? Are you doing this? So I just felt I was left to kind of blame it on myself, and was often quoted a scripture from D&C somewhere that I can't remember now, that basically to some it's given to know, and to some it's given to just believe in their
on others who know.
On others who know.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was so, and I would have leaders point out, well, like, look, you have so-and-so, you have so-and-so who's so faithful. You have so-and-so's testimony to carry you. And I tried to convince myself that was enough. But yes, I think that's where like the self-esteem piece comes in, because it's like, you're a daughter of God, but you're not a knower.
That's right. Why don't I get to know?
Why don't I get to know? I would, having my own kids now, I'm like, but I would never just make sure 1/3 of them knew, right? Or 2/3. And then you have to just trust your brother and sister. It's okay.
Right.
So
yeah, I'm just because I relate so much to your story. Like I remember, going to the MTC and then going out in the mission field, having wanted to know the whole time, did the seminary thing, did BYU, and I never got the confirmation. So I just remember the moment I was about to go teach my first discussion for real in Guatemala. And I'm just like, well, I'm just going to say I know, because I still, and so to the world, I would have been perceived as a knower, but in my heart, I just decided to say that I knew when I didn't know. And sometimes I think that people that we view now as being weaker, let's just say as teens or even on the mission or whatever, are actually just the most honest of us, who just couldn't lie and say they knew when they didn't know. I think there's a lot of people like that. And they're viewed as the weaker missionaries or the less faithful ones that don't go. But really, in some ways, they have the most integrity, because they don't go on the mission because they don't want to lie.
Right.
Right.
At the end of the day, that would have been my former husband. He's like, I didn't know. How was I going to go serve a mission when I've never been a knower?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, you were here growing up. I was in Florida, and I was also not a knower, as it turns out. But just the different framings we receive about when we don't know, and we're honest about, I don't know, because I was very honest as a teen saying I don't know. And my reframe was so related but different, where it was like, well, you won't have a testimony of belief. Not everyone has a testimony of belief. So your testimony doesn't reside in belief. your testimony may reside in the living of it.
The fruits.
Right?
The
Yes.
fruits. The-
So then that was my knowing, where I was like, okay, all right. So my knowing is
But then, and I still remember sitting in fast and testimony meetings, just being so confused because people would get up and know things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so do we value knowing, but we also value faith?
right. Yeah.
So I'm like, which
which is it?
one?
Yeah.
I'm like, what is
Yeah.
it?
So
And then is it
true.
really how we act that actually is the most
Yeah.
important of all? We just dropped into a full-on epistemology discussion right here on Mormon Stories. But
I have a question around roles, because I think this is interesting with women in divorce and then becoming single moms, right? That it can feel very precarious. How growing up, teen years, what would you say about how you related to the role of a woman in the church? Did you take it super seriously? What did you absorb? What did you take in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there was always an understanding of you're going to be a wife and mom. And I didn't spend a lot of time on that. Like I had more, short-term present goals. I was involved in, some athletic pursuits that I enjoyed. I liked school. I was excited for college, but that was always kind of this overarching thing. Like, but the point, right? The point is wife and mother. And yeah, that was always there. And so, yeah, it is interesting though, because as I learned later about like stages of identity development, I was like, that's something that kind of sets, I feel like, Mormon girls and guys, right, both just up for a foreclosed identity, right? There wasn't room for lots of exploration because that was, you had your end purpose set for you.
So for you, did you think about a career, for example, that you would have, or did you kind of have the assumption of, nope, I'll most likely have children, be at home, be married?
Yep, the latter. And I would say, and I enjoy what I studied, but I've started calling it like I picked a mom major, right? Which again, I've loved, but teaching, you can be with kids, the same schedule as kids, you have summers off, it was definitely decided around that ultimate plan and purpose of like wife and mom, and teaching was really compatible with that.
yeah. Okay. What in terms of like dating and your opportunities to meet lots of different types of people and to date lots of different people before you chose your husband, how was that for you? Were you discouraged from dating like many Utah Mormon teens are?
I don't remember necessarily being discouraged from dating. I definitely can recognize whatever my own self-esteem stuff was. I really sought external validation. I think especially from boyfriends. I had a single boyfriend through most of high school that was just kind of this all-important relationship for me, and definitely was, I don't know that there are any high school relationships that are just super healthy, but so it was not that. I wouldn't call it super healthy. And then come college, this is a funny story. I was actually at like 18, 19. I had gone to Utah State and
Go
found.
Aggies. Go Aggies.
Yes, I still love Utah State. And I found myself engaged. It's like this dream this is an engagement I called off. So this is not the divorce we're going to talk about. Maybe there's some, unifying theme there that I was not going to be successful at being married. But I was so young and found somebody quite a bit older who returned missionary, just ready to get married. And again, he knew that we were supposed to get married. And again, I was like, well, I know I'm not a knower, so I should probably just trust
This is
him.
a pickle of a situation. If I'm
Yeah.
not a knower,
Right. But
and
then
he's
I would
saying he
like
knows.
default to like, what could go wrong? We're going to get married in the temple. We're going to, right? I'll have checked this final important box. And again, I was just young. The closer it got, the more uncomfortable I got. And that's a total tangent we don't need to get into. Luckily, I did call that off before we got married. And that was just massively relieving. But I remember it being this huge exercise and almost just mini crisis of I'm like, why can't I get answers? Why can I never get an answer to prayers, right? I had no solid decision-making model, and I would just keep praying and waiting for impressions or waiting for, and then reading all the talks from general authorities I could find. But yeah, I called that one off, and that was definitely a good move. But then fast forward another, 4 years, my former husband and I had been dating for about 2. And again, it was one of those things. It's so funny to think back on and try to remember even discussions around it. But we were both kind of just, this was the next step. All my college roommates were married off, right? I was living on my own, still up there trying to decide what I was going to do. It's just so crazy to me that 23 and unmarried in Utah is like old.
Spinster.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so we really were at this point of, after dating 2 years, like, I guess you get married.
Right.
This is right. And everybody's asking why you aren't married yet. And so we did. We got married in the Logan Temple.
Okay. Do you remember at that point, what drew you to your husband, or what you had been taught to value, what you were looking for within Mormonism?
Yes. Well, already he was not a return missionary.
Oops.
So
That's a strike against him.
It really was.
Yeah.
That was, but
Sketch.
he was willing to go back to church. And I was super on the fence in college when I was right out of my childhood home. I had roommates that would, be supportive in us going, but left to myself, I just always felt like, what is wrong with me? I am not good at this. Like, I was just not good at being a good Mormon, but I was just so conflicted over it because I wanted to, right? I wanted to receive these blessings and to be this, just good Mormon.
Yeah.
And so when we reached this point of, it's just time to get married, I was like, oh, this is it. This is going to be we're going to go to the tent. This is where my, good Mormon life starts. And that was my thinking around it. I think he was, and that was just, we were not good communicators, but we had also both grown up with temple marriage is kind of all you need, right?
That's
all our
right.
temple, what are the temple prep classes where they're like, as long as, Heavenly Father's central, right? Your relationship, this is what we were taught, relationship with him is central. And then your spouse is secondary, and you have a temple marriage, like you're set.
And there's that Spencer become a quote, I think it is, that's like any two faithful Mormons can make a marriage work if they follow the gospel.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. And we had definitely
Worst quote ever.
So we just had very not well managed expectations. I think I really just thought, I'm like, okay, I have made it. We are getting married in the temple.
Yes.
Now it's going to be smooth sailing. And
can I just note that, like, with the church having $250 billion in wealth, they could come up with a curriculum where they teach young couples before they get married, like, here's healthy communication skills, here's healthy boundaries, here's healthy, mental health individually. And, they can provide, and here's how to find out compatibility. Here's a sexual health and how to have healthy sex lives. Like they could develop, and I know there's like a marriage prep class, but my sense is that's more gospel centered than it is like professional mental health centered,
absolutely.
right?
That was my experience. And right, instead, on the other extreme, I feel we were gifted things like very unhelpful books. Like one of them was I'm like, this is just more like guilt and somehow shame inducing, even though
What
now
book was it?
Between Husband and Wife.
I knew you were going to say that.
Did you?
Are you familiar with it, Julia?
Yeah, I minored in marriage and family relations at BYU, Idaho. And that book, even just flipping through it as an ex-Mormon, like it's so bad. Can you talk about some of that, Meg? Like
I
the
did
content?
not get through tons of it because it felt so icky. It felt
It
like,
is icky.
yes. And I'm like, I just felt like the church was just constant mixed messages. I'm like, wait, we're married. All this stuff is allowed now, except nope, still feel really bad about some stuff.
You're talking about sex.
Yes, it was
Okay.
all about between husband and wife sex stuff.
Ah.
And so those were, which is
Wow.
just so interesting. Like those were gifts. Those were like bridal shower gifts.
They're like, enjoy.
And yes,
instead
We're
of
giving
like-
you the best.
Instead of like John Gottman,
it's so
you know,
right.
or like
Yes,
Esther Perel,
exactly.
like experts
to
in the
help
field.
set you up
Yeah.
for, and we weren't right. It wasn't till years later where we're on the brink of divorce that a therapist recommends a book like that.
Yeah, it's
right? Like that's where we needed to start. And I mean, right now already, I feel like I have conversations and hopefully I'm setting some groundwork with my own kids of just communication and healthy relationships and right, like how to repair and all these things that I just did not have right a lot of experience with. And so I for sure got married thinking, thank goodness, temple marriage is gonna
help everything. It's going to fix. It's going to redeem me.
Yes,
Box
exactly.
checked, like
yes,
achievement, level achieved, right?
Right. Yes, exactly.
Leveling up.
And honestly, that is Young Women's.
Yeah.
I do feel like that is the pinnacle end of Young Women's. Like you can add children a sprinkle, but really Young Women's is all the temple. It's like, just get yourself to the temple. Get yourself married. Get yourself chosen real quickly.
Exactly.
Find your worthy priesthood holder.
Right. And be worthy. I grew up with, I think they've probably stopped this too, but those postcards of like, I had them on my mirror, like that was like of licked cupcakes and chewed gum and like all those things that.
Meaning don't have sex before marriage.
Right. Just the reminders
or you'll be damaged goods.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Wait, Meg, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
So you talk about this knowing. I wonder, and maybe you've already answered this, but with being engaged before and your who becomes your husband later, did you pray and ask specifically if these men were right for you to marry? And if you did, like, did you feel like they say a burning in your bosom if it's right or a stupor of thought if it's wrong? I know for me, like, before you answer, like, they said sometimes I was told that if you don't feel a stupor of thought, like if you don't get the answer no, then the answer could be yes, even though it doesn't feel like that. Like, what was your experience with that?
Yes, no, that's so familiar. And I felt like I lived forever in this limbo land of not being able to decide. Also, I felt like I was kind of in this stupor of thought. So I was like, what is wrong with me? And then you scramble to be like, okay, I'm going to read my scriptures. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get an answer. And with the first engagement I called off, I feel like I was very close to almost talking myself into, well, I don't have any confirmation, but I don't feel like I'm in a stupor of thought. And so maybe I just need to move forward and see what happens, right? Because I also found there was some talk or something about how, which not that I disagree with, right? Indecision, you can't stay there forever. So I probably did move forward, and it was with like the dress fittings and getting pictures scheduled, and like every step closer, it became more clear that I'm like, okay, I can't do this. Then the next time I was older, and I think that contributed to me thinking about it less because it was just time. And I did every major decision I tried to pray about. I can't say I ever felt like I received answers. And I think that's like interesting too, right? Just even attribution theory, all these times growing up where I would say prayers, like I just didn't get answered. I attributed that to just not being noticed.
Yeah.
But I was like, what if I had found my keys even, right? One of those 5 times I prayed about it or right.
How that might have
So,
changed.
yeah, I feel like I prayed all the time and just never experienced what, I heard other people testify about receiving any answer.
I relate to that too. Okay, so there's this spectrum. I'm gonna make this up, and it's way more complex than the way I'm gonna make it up. But there's, on the one hand, totally Twitter-pated, totally in love, marrying your best friend, like church isn't even involved. This is your one and only true person, and you knew it from almost the start. That's one extreme. The other is like dead inside, not attracted at all to them, totally just robot going through the motions, but probably would have never married this person if you weren't under the influence of being pressured to marry someone. And this is, probably might be hard to answer, but where were you? How would you describe where you were along that manufactured, contrived continuum I just offered you?
We were probably definitely closer to the like happy Twitter-pated end. We were really good friends. We were really happy. I think my former husband would probably say the temple marriage. It was downhill from there. Like we were happier those 2 years dating when we were more inactive than when I tried to force a return to being
conformity and
really
back on
active.
the track of interesting.
Yeah. So we were definitely, but I also think we weren't in a place where we would have talked about getting married if I wasn't feeling just old and like it was time to get married. So we've joked about it since, but yeah, he will tease that since that return to the temple marriage, it was downhill from there.
Interesting.
Wait, can I ask?
Yeah, please go ahead, Julie.
Oh, and please don't answer any questions that you don't want to. So whenever you said that you were dating for 2 years, that kind of surprised me because you often in Mormonism, you date for, they say short, I guess they say long dating, short engagement, but dating for 2 years, because in Mormonism, you have to stay abstinent. And so I was just wondering if that was hard for you to date for 2 years or what was that like for that time?
Yeah. And this is it's funny and really just culturally, I'm like, this is so backwards. But when I say we were inactive, we were practically living together, but quietly, right? Like I knew this was embarrassing. I knew this wasn't okay. I really worried that I'm like, we can't, even when he would suggest, he's like, we can just get married civilly. I was like, oh no, I felt like a grandparent that if it's possible to die of disappointment, like I would cause that. Was very, I'm the oldest grandchild, by the way, but that was like very real pressure for me at the time. And so, yes, it was a whole process. He moved out. That's part of the second half of the year was waiting 10 months to be able to get married. So there were definitely
because you confessed at some point. Do you want to talk about that? Just so never Mormons know.
I can.
Yeah.
I have and this I didn't even, which I want to speak about. I'm glad it's changing, but yes, our experiences, because we were in different, he was still, I think, assigned to a home ward. I was in a student ward. So our experiences with the whole repentance process were very different. And mine was horrible, absolutely horrible. His, I feel like, was very reasonable. It was
who was in what ward?
So my former husband was still in a home ward. I was in a student ward.
Okay, so family ward versus student ward. And yours was horrible?
Mine was horrible. I had to have weekly meetings to share more and more details because I wasn't. And if I questioned, right, why is this necessary? I wasn't showing godly sorrow.
You did question?
I did. I asked why the details and why the repeated meetings. And it was because
love that.
I wasn't showing godly sorrow. And so I was given readings like assignments, miracle forgiveness,
Oh my gosh.
of soul symbols and sacraments.
That's Jeffrey Holland's talk that he gave at BYU. Were those help? Keep going. You were
It was
making
not. It was awful. It was like one of the darkest, I feel like darkest seasons of my life. And this, I can see now this bishop was very out of line, but he would comment, hopefully I don't die before we meet again.
Finish your repentance, because if you die
Whoa.
before you complete your repentance, then what?
And then, I don't know, spirit prison.
Wait, he said he hoped you didn't die before your next meeting with him?
Yes.
Oh,
Before I finished the
gosh.
process. Yeah. It was, and this, we've unpacked this a little bit, my former husband and I, that no wonder it was just this horrible experience trying to return to church, return to the temple, get married in the temple. And so
wow.
that was a bit traumatic at the time, just the
Mhm.
level of just those, it was another super icky thing, those conversations. But I didn't know I could try to know differently.
Yeah.
Like for me and my background and what I just still believed was that's kind of the mouthpiece of God in my space right now. And so, yeah, that was awful.
Oh, I am sorry.
But so, yeah, we spent 10 months not living together and then we're able to get married in the temple. So,
And that was punitive. Basically, your bishop saying you had sex, so you have to repent. So wait 10 months
yeah.
and then you can have a temple marriage.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yes, which we were told 10 months was like generous. I think it's supposed to be a year.
So
Wait, can I ask?
He
Mm.
Oh, sorry.
gave you a discount for good
Yes.
behavior.
I think so. Because we were headed in the right direction.
Wait, can I ask another question? So, like, sometimes when a couple is sexually active, the bishop pressures them to get married, even though they weren't planning on it. Did you experience that at all?
No, I did not. I feel like it was definitely me reaching a point of I need to turn my life around, which was so unnecessary. Like we were, like I said, just good friends. We were going to school. We were happy, like things were good.
Right.
But I definitely was feeling old, right? Like I
Aw.
needed to get
At age what?
23.
23.
Mhm. Yeah. So, well, I would have been 22. We got married when I was
Oh
23
my gosh, that's so young.
after. But yeah,
Was-
that explains the 2 years.
Was part of the, when you were talking about, this idea of being redeemed through getting married, was
Mhm.
part of it this experience that you had of the 10 months feeling so dark and that, there wasn't this fit
Right.
that
And
you
I,
had like seriously made, I don't know, like hurt your salvation potential, and it was a way to restore yourself. Like, was that part of it?
yes. Oh, for sure. For sure. And
Yeah.
I think that just my expectation that this temple marriage was going to be some mark of worthiness, because I did just feel so, and that drives me crazy now, right? But just this sense of so unworthy. You've made, like,
Yes.
done these really, just being reminded that like sexual sins are second to murder, like being called practically a murderer. It's like, that is so,
Yeah.
for most people just trying to do their best, and then being, somebody suggesting you've essentially almost murdered somebody. It's that serious. So I definitely had this, I think, expectation that a temple marriage was everything would feel better and everything would feel lighter and everything would feel okay. And then somehow the temple marriage like depressed me more. Like the temple part, all of that depressed. So I
Right.
got more depressed. And I think part of that was it didn't just miraculously like fix everything.
Yep.
Right. I didn't feel better. This was like what was supposed to be like, we've made it, we're set. And it didn't. And I think that's probably where like my former husband would be like, that made it worse. Right. Going back to church made everything worse.
Yeah.
Was our experience.
Yeah. So like, I mean, I'm getting the vibe, just to summarize, that like you were actually in a very healthy, happy place as a couple, living together, getting to know each other, and not having the church in your life. And weirdly, the church all of a sudden gives you all this guilt and shame and stress and pressure. And it's almost like initiates the beginning of the spoiling of a relationship.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if you feel like maybe without all of that, you actually might still be married, or do you feel like there were still irreconcilable differences in spite of all that?
No, I think that's hard to say.
Yeah.
I think, we've kind of reached a place where it's the easiest, like A to B point to connect is we probably wouldn't have gotten married without that pressure of it being our next step toward eternal salvation. So, but I'm also in a place where I think I shared already with you both that I wouldn't do anything differently. I feel like it's just because of our kids and where we're at now. I'm so grateful. Everything worked out just as it did. I wouldn't change a thing. But being totally honest, I think both of us are just kind of reached a place where I'm like, yeah, I don't know that we would have gotten married.
Yeah.
And I also want, I want that for my kids to be able to grow up and have that exploration phase versus that foreclosed identity, right? Like so many important, like really important things to consider when or if they ever decide to get married. It'll look so different. I really hope, that framework looks so different for them.
Okay. So I guess one of the dynamics many have to deal with is like having sex for the first time on their wedding night. And I guess y'all already knew there was some fundamental compatibility there. So I guess that I'm assuming that made your wedding night less of a potential disaster.
Yes, except
although maybe not. Sounds like
no,
maybe not.
I remember sobbing because it wasn't our first time.
Oh no. Oh.
Right. So now I just was so ill-equipped to
wow.
like hold or handle any of this. And my poor then husband, he's like, what is happening? Right. It's like no surprise now for that his perception was like going back to church ruined everything because I still, and again, it's the mismanaged expectations. I thought like that would fix everything, but that guilt doesn't just disappear, right? It's so conditioned, like that conditioning runs so deep. And so, yes, it should have been great, but I still felt so guilty that we'd done it backwards, right? That we hadn't,
Yeah, because when you're back on track, right?
Yes.
Then what track means is the ideal again.
Yeah.
Then you're back in touch with what the ideal was, what it is like for everyone else. And so now you're measuring,
and
is that right?
super sensitive to like I fell short. And
you're like, and here I am again. Not good enough, not a fit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a good question.
Dang. So all this, again, this stuff even spoiled your wedding night and spoiled the beginning because now you're feeling shame and guilt for mistakes of the past.
Yes.
Not a great way to start.
It was not you're not off to a great start.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you get married and let's talk about what your agreement was. Let's just say there's such thing as a marital contract, whether that's explicitly discussed or not, whether it's said or just implied. But like you mentioned the church curriculum, the marriage prep class, saying that it's God and the church first, and then your marriage, second, and then your individual health and well-being third.
I guess so. Yeah.
I don't know. So like, what was the marriage contract as you can best remember, again, either implied or explicit, as to your relationship with God and the church and how that would frame your marriage?
And I would say it was definitely implied because we just didn't have the tools to communicate more explicitly or well. But there was resentment really early on because of us just being in different places with our relationship with the church. Like I mentioned, I think my husband was ready to like, hey, there you go. We checked that temple marriage box. Can we go back to how things were, where we would like adventure on Sundays? Or he was just content to return to being inactive. And again, we just hadn't communicated about this. So we were already set up for problems because I was like, oh, no. We're like regular temple attendants, and we are saying yes to callings now, and we are going to church regularly. Like that was in my mind. This was my like pivotal like turning point where I was getting back on track, and he was more just doing the temple marriage for me, right? And for, you know, the reasons I felt were important. So we were definitely on very different pages there. So my understanding of like what I thought the agreements were, the marital contract, he was instantly not interested in. So then I was really frustrated. I'm like, well, what do you think we signed up for? We just got married in the temple. Like, take me to the temple.
What are some examples of, you know, the specifics of that contract in your mind, you know?
Just regular temple attendance as one.
Okay.
And which I did not like it either, but I was like, we have to go, right? Like you need to go with me. And so that was always a bit of a fight. Then same thing with church. I just felt like we fell into this not ideal dynamic of where I'm just nagging, and we'd never experienced that before. Like me nagging to do something and then him feeling like I wasn't listening, right? Of like, he just did not want a lot to do with the church, so we just kind of waffled in that space for a while.
Can I ask? So part of the marriage agreement, I guess, in Mormonism is that in the temple, at least in the endowment, the woman covenants through her husband, and the husband covenants to God. With your husband or with your current husband at the time, with him not being as active as you were, did you feel like, like disappointment did you feel any kind of thing about that?
Yes, I felt really frustrated. I felt like, and again, this was just zero communication around it. But I just thought we were on the same page, right? That he was going to re-engage with me, right? That he would, even though he didn't serve a mission, that's okay. He was now going to be this really strong priesthood holder in the home. And it was going, right? It was going to be set up and structured how I grew up believing is what I needed to, do. And yeah, it was something we argued about quite a bit.
I'm curious, how much of this was like you having a genuine desire to like develop your spirituality in the faith / you feeling a genuine inclination that if you were to have kids, they would do best being raised as faithful Mormons, versus guilt or shame or conditioning or pressure that was like pleasing parents, pleasing grandparents,
I would
external stuff.
Say like 99% external stuff, right? The guilt, the conditioning, and I'm just like, why did I not let myself think for myself earlier, right? I just felt so much on autopilot, right? It was just this, I think, indoctrinated need to do it this way. Right. Later, a therapist, right, will call it like shooting on myself. Stop shooting on yourself, because it was all these. I'm like, no, we should be doing this. We should be going to the temple. We should be accepting these callings. We should be praying together. We should be
tithing 10% of your income.
Oh, that was a huge, fight.
Why?
Well, he didn't want to. He could not stand paying. He didn't agree with paying 10%.
It's a lot.
And I'd be like, we should, you need to. It would be something. And even now though, we'll laugh. He's like, I'm so glad I always slacked on tithing.
Yeah. Because Mormons really regret how much they gave the church.
Oh, so much. Yeah.
In many ways, as your story is going along, what I'm realizing is like, it seems like you you met and had some time together where you were more authentic, you were more
Yes.
connected to yourselves. And then it's like you had a moment of where the conditioning caught up to you. You're feeling older. You're feeling like you kind of,
Yes.
and so you go back and the bishop adds a ton of shame, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so then you're needing the worthiness. But it feels like your husband was like, we're going to do this temple marriage. And then he kind of goes back to authenticity
Yes.
of like, yeah, but
Yes, which he
right,
was
this is
always,
kinda who I
always
am,
better
so-
at, right? He
but
was
yeah,
always better at being able to like stand alone a little bit, right? Like just to say, not serving a mission.
right.
Not, and he was able to be confident in that where I didn't have that. I always felt very just this pressing need to conform with whatever, right, being a good Mormon looked like.
Right.
And even when I was like faking it, right? I would do it quietly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like people, when we were off in college and people wouldn't necessarily know that he was, that we were living together after my roommates were married, or, you know what I mean? It was always something that I understood to be like, needs to be
Mhm.
secret, even though, like you said, like between the two of us, it was honestly healthy and happy and
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, you're systematically being taught to ignore how you think and feel, to not be tuned into who you are and what you want. You've got this external source of authority telling you all these things you and your husband should be doing that's not authentic to who either of you are, but that also is adding a bunch of stress and unpleasantries to the relationship. Like, doesn't sound great.
right.
And that's your start. And you're so, yeah.
And that's the beginning. Yes, that's
That's how it starts.
the beginning of the end. Yeah.
Beginning of the end, you said.
Yeah. Right?
Right?
Like if we go back far enough, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, because we want to focus on the divorce part,
Yes.
how, and we're just going to basically say, how would you characterize from the marriage to the point where things started really to fracture?
So if I just to kind of line it up, we got married when I was 23 and then started having kids, had our first when I was 25 and 27 and then 30. This was I was 30 when my third was born. But this whole time there's perma church activity level tension, right? If we can call it that. I'm trying to like and I would get so resentful because I'm like, I was having a hard time like wanting to go, right? I was doing it so much out of feeling that duty or responsibility. And I was like, I need a partner. I need you to be supportive. And right, he's feeling the same way, but in the other direction, right? Why can't I be supportive of us not being active in church? But he ended up, and I should mention, we at this time live in a rural community in Utah, very active LDS population. And my then husband, when I was pregnant with our third, voluntarily resigns his membership from the church.
How many years into your marriage?
So 23 to like 20, I was 28, 29. So six-ish years in. So we've been waffling back and forth. I'm trying to get him to engage. And finally he's like, but then he had his own
journey.
faith crisis, right? Before he just was kind of content to be inactive.
Right.
But then he really got into researching and exploring and learning more. And so he resigned.
Did he do that?
Reason. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Did he do that quietly or was his resignation and his faith crisis, was that known to you?
Yeah.
It was known to me and he tried to include me and I was really awful to him, which is sad. I didn't want to hear it. I felt like this was one more thing he was like, I took it personally. I would say things like, why would you not decide this before we got married in the temple. Like I felt like it was so unfair to me when I still was in this place of wishing I had like a partner in the Mormon church, right? I wanted this priesthood holding partner, and I just had very little, like no empathy, very little patience for him wanting to work through this faith crisis. So I still even now think that must have been so lonely. And I'm so grateful that like your work was out there. Like he had places that felt less lonely, I'm sure, and resources, and was able to find, because when you're in it in like a very active ward, you feel like so alone, right? You think you're the only one. And he was the first in our ward to voluntarily resign, and it was a big it was a big deal.
Wow.
And so yeah, he wasn't trying to be quiet or secretive. He didn't try to hide it. He tried to include me, but I, for a lot of years, refused to
Shut it down, kind of.
Yeah.
And that's tough because he was just kind of going along to get along, but it just wasn't working out for him.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And he wasn't hiding it from you, because that's a really extreme act to resign in the Mormon context, to resign your membership while you're early in your marriage, after there's a kind of an understanding as to the marriage contract, that the temple marriage, it's built on eternal families. You're going to be together forever. The kids are going to be born under the covenant, you know,
Right.
with both of you faithful. Like that would end, I would say, at least 50% of Mormon marriages, that one of the
Right.
spouses just resigning. That would end it right there.
Yes. And that was definitely
Is that how it felt? Like in that
crossroads.
moment, he was very much drawing a line in the sand that
well, and that's what felt very, and we were just so disconnected, because I felt like if he had any idea how hurtful this was or how scary this was, he just wouldn't do that. And it honestly felt like a huge betrayal at the time. And we reached some point, some hard conversation where he explained like this, do you think I took this lightly? Do you think I took this decision lightly? Like this was just my integrity demands. He's like, I can't live like this anymore.
Oh, wow.
And right, I love you. I love the kids, but I cannot fake this.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable for me. And so that was a big, I don't know, that woke me up a little bit to finally, I was so stuck in my own like rage at him, but to be like, I knew him well enough. Like he didn't take this lightly, right? Like he must really not believe this, right? Because I'm here thinking, if there's a chance your family gets to be together forever, and we just opened, this was mean of me too. I don't know if the first presidency still sends letters to everybody who resigns. Is that old, or do they still do that?
No, or the membership department, one of the two.
Okay. So he had got a letter from the first presidency that explained every, covenants being forfeited and all these things. And I opened it.
It's basically a letter from the prophet saying you're condemning yourself to hell for eternity and your children.
And when your believing wife like opens it, I was like, he's just like ruined everything. He took everything away. And so it wasn't even my letter to open, but I did. I was so upset, and I ripped it up and I threw it away.
Oh no.
Oh,
Did you get to read it?
It was so, no, he did read it. And I still later, but he had wanted to save it. I think, I don't know.
You like taped it back.
Sorry. But like to read that I'm like, you just took away, I have no, which should have been so telling for me. Like, why do I have no control and no say and no power?
Right.
Right. But I didn't question those things at the time. I just was so upset at him that he just cost me my eternal family. So, but
wait, so you said something interesting. You said that he was the first in your ward to resign or choose to resign. Did he have like a higher up calling, or did this happen? Did other people resign, or did it affect the ward to some degree?
I think and again, this is right, how many 11, like 14 years ago. So since quite a few, right, have resigned. But at the time, and this area has grown a ton, it was still really small, rural area when we moved in. But the bishop was, really just genuinely sad, genuinely concerned about our family. It was his first experience with a member asking for their name to be removed, and having to navigate that whole process was just a big deal at the time. And it's just very much not like my former husband. It's not his personality to just kind of go inactive. It really was important to him to not be affiliated with the organization anymore. So he did, that whole process. And I think I mentioned I was pregnant with our third child at the time, and went to meet with the bishop, who had worked with my husband with his resignation and everything. And again, he was like honestly concerned and worried about our family. And I had questions, and I was worried about our family after that letter from the first presidency. And the bishop had what he explained, like looked into it, said this was his first experience with it. And we had some, unusual factors, but explained to me essentially like our first two kids were born under the covenant. And so they were still technically sealed to me. But then this baby I was pregnant with, where her fathers resigned and forfeited all these covenants, like she would not be sealed to me.
Oh my God.
I was just, it's like,
Meaning she'll be an orphan in heaven.
Honestly, in my mind, I'm like, she's just off on her own. And I was just shaking in the chair trying. I mean, I'm like 7 months pregnant, I think, just trying not to throw up. I was really sick for all my pregnancies, but I was just really sick over it. And then really confused, and then really mad at my husband. But he explained just she won't be born under the covenant. And I asked, I was like, why can't, which I knew the answer. I think it just came out, but why can't she be sealed to me after she's born, after she's here? And well, because you're a woman, right? You can't just go have a child sealed to you by yourself. And we finally, and I feel so bad for this leader, right? It was an awful position, but I kept, right? I was just a desperate mom at the point who still didn't know better than to believe what I'd always believed, right? This thing I was trying so hard to make work so I could have a forever family. And essentially we got to a point to have her sealed to me, it would look like divorcing my husband and eventually remarrying in the temple.
So you would have to basically connect yourself to a man.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And then my kids could be sealed to me under that sealing.
So the only way for your kid, your third child, not to be an orphan is for you to hurry and marry some other faithful Mormon man.
Yes.
Somehow the church always wins in that scenario, right?
Exactly.
But also,
I can't believe this is the option.
But also, like how twisted that your child born to your husband, your third child, would belong to somebody else in the eternities, or I guess all of them,
So
because he's resigned.
Yeah.
Right.
He forfeited. He voluntarily forfeited that.
But the weird thing is if he had just divorced you, married somebody else, and got sealed to that person as a Mormon, which he could have.
Then he could still,
he'd have it all.
He could be sealed to
Then like me, because I received, this is where Mormon theology always breaks down. If you scratch the surface of Mormon theology, it's like a centimeter thick. Because my parents got divorced, and then they each had second spouses, and then they divorced them, and then they each fell in love with their third spouses, and both ended up getting sealed to their third spouses, which meant their original sealing had to be nullified. So I'm at BYU as like a freshman at BYU. And yeah, my parents are divorced, but at least I'm sealed to my parents still, which is weird because how's that going to work if we're all in heaven, but our parents are sealed?
But it'll work out. It'll just work itself out.
Yeah, it's all good. But anyway, then I find my mom doesn't want to be sealed to my dad. She wants to be sealed to her third husband. So she has to like timidly say, "Hey, honey, I just wanted to let you know I'm canceling the sealing." And then I'm just like literally thinking, oh, great. So I'm not sealed to either of my parents in the afterlife. I'm not going to choose. So that was a crack in my testimony, because I'm like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So then I'm like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I could just visit both of them. And then I'm like, well, if that's true, why does the sealing matter at all?
Why does it matter
Right?
at all?
Yeah.
That is, but it's so heavy when you
Yeah.
still believe that's how it works.
It's kind of, it's like
Right?
emotional violence.
Yes.
To you.
Yes.
As you're
It
thinking
was
about it.
so
Mm-hmm.
scary. Like, it was just scary. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I felt this responsibility to problem solve this. But also on the other hand, that was the first time that something cracked, right? That I was all of a sudden, I was like, oh, I don't, whatever, right? Mormon God, I'm trying really hard to believe in. It's not that, right? It's not one that's going to say, you don't get to be with your daughter, or any relationship you earn with your daughter doesn't matter because of a choice her dad made.
Right.
That just, I could not make that make sense. And so that explanation, which is funny because it was at that time I would have had so much support to pursue a divorce. Like you said, right? This was the ultimate betrayal. My husband just resigned from the church. It would have been easy to ask for a divorce. I would have felt justified, and again, had a lot of support for that. People
Like from ward members?
from ward members, and yeah.
Sometimes in-laws of the non-believing spouse will encourage their in-law to divorce their own child.
Yes.
Or to punish them in some way because they're so angry that their child
is the one that's left and messed up the internal family. No, absolutely. And that people would share, we fully support you keeping your covenants with your Heavenly Father over civil ones with your husband. And so that was shocking to me, because even though I was trying so hard to believe all the things, I was like, I don't believe in choosing these abstract things that I, don't even know, can't see, have to have faith in.
Let's just remember, you never really got your witness to begin with.
Exactly. over a person right in front of me, over my kid's dad.
Right.
It's craziness.
It is. So
I call it a manufactured scarcity. Like, if you talk to any other Christian, they're like, of course our families are all going to be together in heaven. Like, it's not even a thing. It's just like, yeah, in heaven, we're all with everybody because good people, they're all together. That's my family. And so like, the church likes to sell it as its selling point, its differentiator, that in this church, in the Mormon church, families are together forever. But the truth is, the Mormon church is destroying families and keeping families apart in the afterlife by having this manufactured belief about eternal families where, oh, by the way, the footnote is everyone's got to make it back, or else there's, quote, empty chairs and then sad heaven because Johnny didn't make it, or Sally didn't keep her covenants. And almost every family has at least some that leave.
Oh, right.
And so like pretty much everyone's set up to be sad and to be missing core family members in the afterlife. And it's literally all manufactured.
It is a setup for sure for most people to fail. Just the amount of loopholes. Do you remember at the time, either with the bishop, I guess you experienced kind of this idea of families can be together forever, just not yours.
Yeah.
But, with the conversation about your third child, and also with your ward family, in essence, being like, you'd have support over divorcing your husband. At that point, do you remember how you experienced that belief of families can be together forever, and what you'd been told and sold about that? Do you remember how you processed that?
Remember that was the beginning of a very debilitating faith crisis, right? That was the first crack, the first where I was finally ready to be more open to this possibility that maybe I've been wrong, or maybe I've been trying to believe in something, trying really hard to make something work that is in fact wrong. So that was, yeah, really, instead of making me feel resolved to get my kids sealed to me under like all the Mormon rules, right? Like the way this bishop just outlined for me, I tried really hard, and I could do a lot of mental gymnastics around other stuff, but not that.
Yeah.
So that was really, that conversation was a huge favor to my then husband, because I was finally like, okay, tell me what you found.
Yeah.
Okay. So up until that point,
Yeah.
he hadn't really shared with you what the reasons were for him wanting to resign and leave the church?
He tried, and I would not listen.
Right.
I think I said, I'm like, if we're going to stay married, we have to never talk about this. Which I'm like, that's a super good formula for a healthy marriage. Like, if this is going to work, we can't communicate.
But that's that's the church. It teaches its members never allow yourself to question, never listen to doubters.
Well, they're so good at that. If they've taught you that cognitive dissonance is the devil,
meaning
right?
If you feel feelings of anger, or if you feel dark feelings, or sad feelings, or scary feelings,
or uncomfortable feelings, it's Satan. So that was like, that connection was really well established for me, right? So I'd be like, oh, that's of the devil. Nope. And I was totally justified in just shutting it down, which was so frustrating. I can only imagine for him. But that, up until, this conversation about our third child, that's what I'd done. I just would not engage with him about his reasons for leaving.
And people in your ex-husband's situation just feel so alone, because the person that they are supposed to love most, the person that they're tied to through kids, won't even entertain their concerns. And that's just devastating. You just feel isolated and desperate.
And I think too, the layer that you're describing of the church actually manufacturing all these further wedges. So now he's wearing that he's, changed belief. He's learned some things and changed his belief. But now you have a bishop, in addition to that, saying to you, sorry about your unborn child who now is lost. Well, how is that going to make you feel about your husband? In addition,
right
now you're like, great, great,
like, look
so
what
there's
you've done.
And then you have your ward members basically saying, divorce him. Like, if there's a time, it's now. Like, he's literally,
right. And
in so many ways, the ward family and the bishop, they're creating more and more of this shame cycle for him, and a wedge for you as a couple to really. So I love that actually in some ways it backfired, and you're like, actually?
Well, I'm just going to call it. I believe that there have been suicides and a lot of suicidality on the part of people, adults in Utah or in Mormonism, in the situation, or in high demand religions, in the situation that you're describing your ex-husband to be in. Because like, you can feel like there's just, I'm going to lose my spouse. I'm going to lose my kids. The whole community's against me, and I can't talk to anybody about it.
I can't imagine that level of loneliness. And it makes me so sad. And I've told him this, like, I've apologized, and I'm so incredibly grateful beyond words that he was brave enough to deviate, and that I got there eventually. But I agree. I think it's heartbreaking. And there was a circle in my area, my neighborhood, my ward, who were very supportive, even though they were still very in. Some of them have since moved, left the church since, but I can remember one Relief Society meeting since my husband had resigned. And it was just something we had to figure out owning, right? Like, there was no hiding it. He didn't want to hide it. He was going to stop coming. I was going to church by myself. But one good friend in Relief Society kind of, I don't remember what the lesson was about, but just questioned the narrative. It was something about the one and only, right? We're the one and only path, the one and only. And her comment was like, essentially so simple. Maybe there are other paths, and that's okay. And I knew it was for me, and it was very generous, and I appreciated it. But then I could also, then it was crickets, right? It was not well received. It was not. So there were like tiny moments after of, right, both support and then also, oh, it's not a big tent. This is not.
I see.
Right. But if you've built, I feel like Mormonism's so good at what they sell, in the sense like, we're going to give you a problem that only we can solve. And so there isn't a lot of room for them to deviate from the narrative that this is the one and only path. Right. But
yeah.
Wow. Okay. So where'd y'all go from there?
So I took kids. We just kind of navigated the mixed faith marriage for a while. Oh, I didn't get to the point. Well, no, I did. Sorry. So I finally, was more open to hearing his reasons.
Wait, what was the time span? Sorry, between him resigning and you saying I'm ready to listen. What was the time span there?
So that would have been, he resigned when I was 27. I think I, around 29, got more, 28, 29, more open to listening. That would have been the conversation with the bishop time. So really that year, 2 years, there was a lot of harm done there, right? Where we're just kind of surviving, not being willing to really like see or listen to each other. And also having a third baby in the middle of all that. But shortly after she was born, like at 30 years old, I was very, very full-blown faith crisis. I knew I was very angry, like back to I'm like, I tried so hard to make this work and it's not even true. And not only is it not even true, it's like not even kind. Like it's just not okay. So I was really, I was upset. And then there's this whole layer of how awful I'd treated my husband over it. And I was like, he was right.
Do you mind taking just 1 minute and saying like, just what the topics were, the issues, like 3 to 5 of your husband's issues, and then 3 to 5 of yours. And we don't have to go into any of them. Just for those who are new to all this, they can look up, they can Google these topics to learn more.
Yes.
But I just want to get a sense for both your husbands and your concerns.
Yeah. So my husband, when I finally was a little more open to engaging around this, he asked, he's like, if I could give you just one thing to read, one thing to look at, would you be open to that? And he must have thought so hard about what would like hook me in really quick. But I was like, okay, yes, sure. I love reading. I love books. I was like, I can do that. Even if I think it's anti-Mormon, I'm going to just, I'll read it. That's fine. And so the first thing or whatever he settled on was about the Book of Abraham controversy. And I can still remember I was super skeptical. I'm like, he thinks, I just thought that was so funny. That's what he gave me to read. But I was just a handful of pages in and could just see where it was going. And it hit me. I'm like, oh my goodness, we can translate Egyptian now, right? We have Egyptologists now. And I was like, it was, seems like such a minor thing, but it was devastating. I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. So that was a big one. And then the CES letter, which I had been very carefully avoiding, I read. And then your work, Mormon Stories, was super instrumental in just providing a safe space to explore when it was all really heavy and feels like your worldview is falling apart, but you have kids that you think you have to have answers for, which now I'm at a place where I'm like, how great that I can tell my kids they don't have all the answers. At the time, though, I felt pressure, right, that I needed to. So, yeah, those were a couple.
Thank you. Okay.
If you had to kind of describe the mixed faith year, was it I don't know how you would
almost
talk
2.
about it
Yeah.
during that time and what it felt like and where maybe if there were places of tension in particular.
Mhm.
How would you describe the stress of that on the
I
marriage?
think just feeling alone, right? There's various ways, right? People have quoted it,
Mhm.
but just it's so like the loneliest feeling to feel alone when you're right next to the person who's like supposed to be your person.
Right.
And I think that does a lot of damage to a marriage because, we were just mostly me, like refusing to communicate. And he's really good. He'll say he could have done things differently. Like he was very critical of the church, which understandably, right? I don't think anybody can skip the anger phase. And his was probably exasperated by being so alone through all of it. So he'll say he wishes he had approached it, like just been more soft around it with me. And so, primarily, I think it was just really lonely. And then we're trying to, and it turned in, I think this definitely contributed it to turning into more of just a roommate situation, right? We're raising kids, but we are just super disagreeing on some really big life things that we can't talk about, so we can't solve. And just that wedge gets, driven deeper. I think.
And by roommate, you mean what?
We were just kind of living together. We didn't actively spend a lot of time together. We stopped going on dates together. And I think the resentment just kept building, right? I resented him for not being this like partner and priesthood holder and taking kids to church with me. And I'm sure he resented me for being so stubborn and refusing to to listen, because it is like once I was there, it was so hard for me to run into like people, friends and family that I love who didn't want to hear it, right? Who didn't want to listen to me, right? And I've been told like we're like church stuff is off the table. I don't want to. And so I've like felt that on the other side. I'm like, but don't you know me? Don't you want to like know why I'm doing this or made this decision? Or so I'm like, oh, I get it now, how he would start to resent me. And like also there's that layer of kids. He didn't like kids going to church, but I refused
the parenting.
Refuse to not go right at the time.
Okay, so attending church and having the children participate was
a hard
part of the rep.
Yeah.
Because from his perspective, if he's viewing the church as a bad thing or even as a cult, then he's seeing you're taking the kids to church as like conditioning them to
and
believe
it's
in
something grateful, right? We're on the same page now, but I'm like, oh, that would be incredibly difficult for me if my co-parent were trying to take the kids to church still, because that is something I very much want to protect them from. I want them to understand it. I don't want to like shelter them from what it is and what it's about and what it teaches. But if I had a co-parent wanting to raise them LDS, I think I'm so, just from my own experience, right? Even if you think you are providing like this nuance or these other perspectives, like just me attending weekly, like that conditioning happened, right? And those shoulds, are placed, and I would not want that for kids. So,
You mentioned one of your babies was blessed by somebody else. Can you talk about the dynamics of that and if that affected your relationship negatively?
Yes, for sure. There was just hard feelings because I wanted it to be her dad blessing her. This was our third baby, the one that was born after the one that's in, I don't know where she is, off by herself in sad heaven.
And for the never Mormons, just context, whenever a baby's born in Mormonism, all the extended family comes to your Sunday meeting, like your ward, your congregation, and then in front of the whole congregation, which is like your community, the streets surrounding where you live. It's this huge event where on Fast Sunday, you invite people up from the congregation along with extended family, and they all circle around the baby up in front of the entire congregation and then give the baby a name and a blessing. And it's always the father that's supposed to be doing it. And if it's not the father who's doing it, what would members assume?
Right. And they knew by now he had resigned, but just so that he's not even in the circle, right? That somebody else.
That's right.
So like that, that'll be hard for me to talk about because I'm sure that was hard on him, right? Somebody else, picking up his new baby because his wife's insisting she be blessed. And he came for it to be with the family.
He went. Is this the same ward too that was saying having opinions about divorce?
Yeah, and we might have split since then because it was a couple of years, but it's still a small community. And so he was definitely just a black sheep for a while, which he is not bothered by. So for whatever that's worth, he was much more comfortable than I was with sitting through somebody else blessing his daughter. But again, it was just one more layer of me resenting that it wasn't him, that he put our family in this situation, that he chose to make himself ineligible to bless his child. Like that was also not good for the marriage. So,
but it's deeply shaming to him, to the one who can't do the blessing. Right?
Yeah, and I don't think he perceived that, right? He was very, but others do, absolutely, and I did. Others do, I did. I could feel like the pity was like palpable.
Yeah,
he was past given right. He was so confident in his position and relationship with the Mormon Church.
Yeah,
he was upset that his kids were still involved, but it was definitely hard. It probably made everybody uncomfortable, honestly.
Yeah.
So
I feel like we missed one point maybe about also why it might have been hard for him to have the kids go to church, in that, like, what is the narrative that could ripple down to your children about him?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think, and I noticed this was as we're getting closer and closer to me leaving as well. But I still remember my then 6-year-old son coming home, and he was just upset from whatever the lesson was in, I don't know if it was primary or Sunday school. But, and this is where I still was on the fence of being a good Mormon. I've always loved coffee. I went a decade really trying not to drink it. But by this point I had gone back to drinking coffee. So there's that background. My son gets in the car and he's like, explains, he's 6. They're having a word of wisdom lesson. And it was one of those like objects, you draw an item, a picture of an item out of a bag, and it goes in a bin literally labeled good or bad.
Oh.
Right. So I'm like, of course, my 6-year-old would draw coffee. He draws out the coffee. And just the fact, though, he was so concerned to tell me, Mom, I don't think you're bad, but I just knew it was supposed to go in the bad side. So I put it in the bad side, but I don't think it's bad. Okay. And just me seeing like I'm like, this is ridiculous, right? The confliction he's feeling over, right, a behavior he sees his parents engage in, which I want him to understand is not bad, right? And then the guilt he feels that he knew he had to call it bad to conform. And so that was just right tip of the iceberg, where I knew they were right having similar, or would have to navigate similar conversations about their dad's membership or, lack thereof.
So if y'all had gotten divorced at this point where you're still a believer and he's resigned, my guessing it would have been sort of a super acrimonious divorce if you had gotten divorced at that point, correct?
Right. It was
possibly.
I think so, because things were, I think with divorce, it's always feels really raw, but I was really unstable just individually myself, right? I was still in that whole deconstruction.
Mhm.
I think of that time and compare it to, there's so many, like there's so many analogies, but one of my girlfriends has a really good one of, it's like you have this vase, this really nice vase, this precious thing, and you drop it and it shatters and you can't step, you can't walk anywhere, you'll step in glass. And not only do you need help cleaning it up, you need help, right, getting out of this mess or putting it back together or picking it up, but nobody's there. People are just being like, well, why'd you drop it? Why'd you do that? Right. And that's how it felt. Like we had put ourselves in this place. Like, well, why'd your husband leave? Why are you staying? Why are you?
Yeah.
Right. So it felt just like this, broken glass everywhere, or this minefield. Like nowhere was safe to step. And so I'm very grateful we didn't pursue divorce at that point, because I just feel like I was barely managing survival mode and very much needed help with some nervous system regulation. And I'm just forever grateful that we didn't impulsively divorce then and there over that.
Yeah.
Really glad.
It's like you all weren't healthy enough to get divorced.
No, like we couldn't even introduce that. There was I couldn't see my next step. Right. And I was still trying to figure out, right, my relationship with the church. I could not, which is so funny now. At the time, though, I could not fathom trying to raise my kids outside of the church, especially in the community we lived.
Yeah.
I felt like even if I could commit to this decision and the potential social isolation for myself,
Right.
like, is it fair to choose that for my kids? Like, I grew up in Utah Mormon, so I knew, like, that lens was familiar. I knew what that looked like. And I would just have these, I'm like, they're not going to have friends. They're not going to get invited to birthday parties. They're not going to get asked to dances. Like, I was just spiraling, trying to anticipate these consequences for my kids. And I just could not wrap my mind around any direction at the time.
Yeah. So fortunately, y'all decided to hang on for a little bit. And what happened?
So we stayed married. I ended up just progressing through my own faith crisis. And then
really quickly, I was just going to say, we have to shine a light on how the Mormon church sets up women to be so vulnerable, because you think about where you are in terms of vulnerability. Okay, you did finish your degree, right? Which puts you, I think, in the minority. I think most Mormon women either don't go to college or they don't finish their degrees. So you were better than average in that you finished your degree, but you hadn't developed your career. You hadn't developed, marketable skills. And then you've got all these kids. What in the heck are you supposed to do as a divorced single mom of 3 kids? How are you supposed to now all of a sudden be providing for yourself? And that someone was bragging the other day about how infidelity / divorce is better in Utah or with Mormons than elsewhere. And I kind of responded, yeah, if you put a woman in a box, she doesn't go anywhere. Like if you put her in jail, she doesn't go anywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, where are you supposed to go?
Right. And I hear that so often. And I think it contributes to such a feeling or sense of stuckness, right? I do think a lot of Mormon women don't have options, I mean, some of them I think don't even know where the money is.
Yeah.
That's right. They may not even have access.
Yeah. I think that's very common and very scary. And like you've said, right, your spouse probably has over a decade of
skills,
retirement and experience and skills and like those
relationships
raises and yes, exactly. It's such and I was, like you said, I was very lucky that I had a teaching license, because that's pretty employable or relatively easy to return to work, but it's still, you don't have the years of like moving up the lanes, right? The pay scale lanes. And it's just terrifying,
Yeah.
right? Like I think so many people stop at that just thought,
Yeah.
right? Like it is not feasible. I can't support myself, right? Where to go, where to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's real.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just got to shine a
Yeah.
light on that, because that's like almost every Mormon woman I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a very scary corner to be backed into. So
So you didn't get divorced.
Didn't get
and then
divorced.
How did things progress to where you did get divorced?
Yeah. Okay. So I worked through my own faith crisis. I resigned from the church at 30. So my husband left it when I was 27. I left 3 years later after a lot of up and down and back and forth and trying to figure out what to do for kids. And then by 34, so 4 years later, we were getting divorced. And those 4 years we were on the same page with church stuff. I would say they were pretty smooth. And it's an understandable, like super common question where people ask if we got divorced over like the faith crises or one or both of us leaving or what that connection is. And like I've mentioned, I'm super glad we didn't get divorced over him leaving. But then like 4 years later, really 7 years after he left, but like the dots are kind of easy to connect in the sense that like experiencing leaving the Mormon faith, right? Where there are kind of dire consequences if you still believe them. Like it's a big decision and a big process, and you do, right? I feel like oscillate through all the stages of grief there. So I think it set us up to start just exploring really how are we living? Like, are we living in line with values? Is this authentic? Is this honest? Is this what we want? And so the whole experience of leaving the church, I think a number of years later, landed us in a place to be open to acknowledge like, oh, I think I recognize this space, right? It's hard to stay, but harder to go. And then somewhere that starts tipping.
Right.
So our marriage was kind of reaching that place where we're like,
where it's harder to stay and easier to go.
Or it's looking like it's getting harder to stay. And maybe the brave next step is to acknowledge like divorce is our next step.
And what I'm hearing is that the faith transition work that you each did, allowed you to ask yourself questions, to connect with yourself in a way, to know yourselves in a way that then you used. And because once it's kind of like you have that, what would I say? Like the pattern of self-reflection.
Yeah. Right.
Right. It's really difficult to unsee or to unknow things about yourself or to unobserve. Right. Or to go back into places where you feel like you're ignoring things that are important to you. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. Oh, 100%. I saw on your bookshelf over there a Cheryl Strayed Brave Enough book. I absolutely love that book. And it's honestly, when I first read that book, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like that elusive experience people are talking about having with scriptures, right? I've never felt this reading my scriptures, but I feel something like reading this. But I love how, anyways, all that to say, I love how she talks about like kind of getting in touch with your core. Like, I feel like there's core knowing, maybe you call it your internal compass, whatever, that I feel like for me, Mormonism really did just condition right out. Right. I felt like I learned to outsource everything. I outsourced all my big decisions, all my am I a good person? Well, am I doing everything I should? Then yes, I'm a good person, right? It didn't have a lot of room for that self exploration and awareness and just being in touch with like what lights me up and what is in line with, my core.
Yeah.
And so, both my former husband and I think had kind of been on that same path, and we're just reaching this place of, this marriage is not it. We were again feeling like, I think that sense of trying to fit in a box that we
like another box,
a different box. And there was still that leftover pressure, though, I think, from the church that at least I had for a long time. Even when divorce would come up post faith crises, I was just like, we don't get divorced.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't get divorced. We're not doing that. We're not doing that to the kids. That's like off the table. Just head down, suffer, endure, right? That was still there. But we were challenging it slowly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've already asked this sort of at the beginning, but I just want to touch base with it again. A mechanistic observation might be, no, wait a minute. You were compatible before. You loved each other. You lived together, and it was the church that messed all that up. Well, now the church layer has been lifted. So you should go right back to really enjoying each other again. Now, of course, that's simplistic. And so, one of the things that comes to mind is, well, maybe the church ruined it. Like if the church all hadn't have been there, then you could have survived. Now, I know I already asked and you said that maybe you would have never gotten married in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But there is that question of, now that you have kids, maybe if the church hadn't have ruined it, you could have actually kept things together. But that's speculation. But I mean, it's just, it's kind of a question worth asking, I think.
Right. And it's a good question. And it's one of those that I'm curious about too. When I was working with my own uncoupling coach through the divorce. So by the time we decided on divorce and I tried to obtain some support, it was interesting as she asked about background, asked about our story, asked about just the history of our marriage and relationship. And of course, the church came up, and she's fantastic. I absolutely adored this uncoupling coach. She was based out of Santa Barbara, California, but it was nice. She didn't have a ton. Well, it was nice and hard sometimes because she didn't have a ton of background with the LDS church. So I would need to do sometimes a little extra explaining, but it was so almost empowering for me to see her reactions to all these things, where I'm like, oh, I wasn't the weird one all along, or I wasn't, because she'd just be like, that's wild. I can't believe that. And she did comment. She's like, I feel like that church set your marriage up to fail. Mm-hmm. And I think there's truth to that. But by the time we were really deciding on divorce, I don't know. I've seen couples like repair beautifully, just completely like burn everything down and rebuild beautifully. And I still can't explain why that wasn't feeling like an option for us. We felt past that point. And we went to, marriage therapy and, tried a number of things, but it just was becoming more and more apparent that, the next step was divorce.
Wait, can I ask a little bit about that?
Uh-huh.
So with what I saw with my parents and their divorce, and even with me and my divorce, it sort of seems like a pattern, or at least in those two experiences, where the church leaders set you up to see a therapist. And I know it was different for you because you had stepped away with him from the church. But so when you saw this therapist, was it like through the church? Were they members, or did it help?
So we didn't try marriage therapy, until we'd both left. So luckily we did not have any referral from church leadership or anything. I found our own marriage and family therapist, and purposefully found a Gottman therapist because I felt like there was, and that was actually at my husband's. He was not interested in going to therapy, but willing to check it out if there was. This therapist had like a whole process, right? We would do questionnaires. We would, there was some outline, seemed to be some system to it. So, but it, definitely proved too little too late. I think she even is the one that shared the statistic that most couples will seek marriage therapy like 6 years too late.
Oh, wow.
And she probably shared because we were the perfect example of that. We were probably 6 years too late. And there's a lot that happens in 6 years that it's probably hard to reset. And those 6 years would have included 2 very separate faith crises and church exodus. So there's a lot there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I have a question. I think, it's interesting in life, I feel like, when we have these moments where all of a sudden we may be confronting a prior judgment we have about something like divorce. And then we, lo and behold, find ourselves in that place. So my question is, what did you feel about people who got divorced or about divorce in general before you got there yourself?
I still remember, because it'll still come up occasionally for me, just left over. I think from years of believing for a long time, I thought divorce was selfish. I thought it was cowardly. I thought it wasn't fair to kids. I thought if, you were a good parent, you would just stick it out, you stay married, excluding, which I feel like it's an important disclaimer. Nothing I advise, within or share within the context of my own story applies to instances where there are abuse, right? That's totally different.
Right.
But for situations like my marriage where kids, even they didn't see, we were very careful not to fight in front of them. I felt like they didn't see a super poor model, right? It wasn't ideal, but that so many parallels between leaving the church and divorce. I'm like, what's good enough, right? Or what's uncomfortable enough to leave, or what discomfort
like
can you live with, right? It's just I was exploring that tipping point for a while, but I definitely so many negative connotations around divorce. I thought it was pretty just lazy, honestly, is how I would have characterized it for a while until we were there.
Right.
Yeah, we have, like, I've mentioned this in other episodes, like you see these news reports in Utah and Arizona and Idaho of these Mormon men, often
violent
dentists, and they kill their wives. Or, the Chad Daybell, Lori Vallow situation where she killed her husband or husbands and he killed his wife.
Yeah.
It's got to be in part because, number one, the stakes in Mormonism are so high, in terms of eternal families and breaking it up and kids that are orphans and all that. But even though that was lifted for you, you're still swimming in the shame of divorce shame that's still in you and in all your family and your friends and the community and all the culturally around you. And I think that's one of the most damaging aspects of Mormon culture is, instead of just it being, oh, what a celebration. Like, you did 10 years together and produced 3 kids. And
we honor that.
We honor what the time you did have. And now it's time to move on to a next phase in life with new partners or by yourself or whatever.
And you're both going to need support.
Yes.
So how can we rally?
Yes.
And let's even have a celebration of the ending of this phase of your life and then a new phase.
Yeah.
Instead, it's just like, oh, we failed. And you failed. No, you failed. No, it's your fault. No, it's not. It's your fault. Let's fight over the kids because we're mad, and let's get as much money as we can and wreck the other person financially. And all because we all feel so shamed and embarrassed and like failures.
And because the narratives that are available
Yes.
are so insidious.
And I think it's so important to bring up because I can't even tell you how many people I've talked to who really in the thick of divorce, and it is terrifying. Like you need support now more than ever because you are just facing these scary decisions of dividing resources and custody and just huge, heavy things when you're also like going through the saddest breakup of your life, right? Like that's just impossibly heavy by itself. And I've talked to too many people who just at those low points have like that thought is there. It'd be so much easier if one of us just died, right? Like that perception that, man, death would be easier. Death of one parent feels easier in this moment.
Wow.
Than moving forward with divorce.
Yeah, that is not okay.
No, it's so heartbreaking. And it's so, I feel, and again, like my experience in visiting with those like in the thick of it, that is a thought, right? Which is so sad.
Yeah. But I mean, those are the stakes. That's how people feel.
Right. Oh, I had for so long, I was like, I'm just going to stay married because I cannot have that conversation with the kids. Right. I did not want to have that conversation. I did not want to have to tell them and then to tell everyone.
Right.
Really, right. Just getting through that part is impossibly scary. But I wish there was more. And I wish we talked about it. Like you said, I wish people had this sense that like, well, what if maybe we can do it different, right?
Right.
Maybe we start looking at this marriage. And I can't remember now who said it. I think it's in Conscious Uncoupling, the book, which I highly recommend. And it was fantastic. And I read through my own divorce. But she talks about, like, as a society, why do we measure the success of a relationship by its longevity?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like, why do we do that? It's successful if it just lasts indefinitely. But what about what it does to the two souls who make up that union?
Right.
Right. Is that something to celebrate? Because if they're getting dim and if they're getting, smaller, and if their kids don't get to know these like bright, different versions of their parents because their parents convinced themselves that they should stay married for the kids. Like, do we celebrate that?
Right.
And just really, trying to shift that.
Yeah. So what did
narrative.
that conversation look like with your kids?
And with each other.
And each other.
Yes, it was rough. I'll talk about with each other first. I am super fortunate that my former husband was willing to collaborate in this space, right? I understand that when you reach like this doorstep of divorce, it is so hard to look at each other, to be in the same room. Their presence triggers you left and right? Your brain like views them as a threat. Like it is just
activating,
physically hard to be around them. It's really asking a lot to stay regulated and even be able to have those conversations. Like, what do we tell kids? What's that look like? So I am very lucky that he was open to that. The very first thing, and this was at the advice of my own uncoupling coach, was right now, before anybody even knows it, we're the only two that know we're planning to get divorced. She's like, can you set this joint intention along the lines of everything you say, everything you do, right? So your words, your conduct gets filtered through the question of how will this affect our family? Because there's the hard and heartbreaking of here and now. She's like, but then there's 2 and 5 and 10 years down the road, there's going to be soccer games. There's going to be tumbling meets. There's going to be, music concerts. There's going to be maybe a wedding, graduations, whatever it is. Do you both want to be there? Do you both want to be there and your presence not detract from your child's achievement or
Got
from
it.
what you're there to celebrate.
So very
And-
intentional, very child
Yes.
focused, and very long game.
Yes. Oh, very.
Oriented.
And she was so instrumental in helping broaden my perspective because, again, when you're in the middle of all these divorce decisions, it's really hard to step back and see that bigger picture. So that was huge, having this trained professional remind me of those things and then give me these action items, like setting that joint intention. She's like, is this a conversation you can have with your co-parent, right? And luckily it was, like, he was open to that. And understanding, like, another piece is going to be just so much surrender, right? I was losing so much control, and that was really hard for me, right? Like, that I was going to lose not just time with kids, but I was going to miss, right, making memories with them too. I think the first trip they took, just with their dad, I think they went to Lake Powell, and it was just impossibly, like, so painful, right? But just sort of practice that. Like, you have these intentions of how you want to show up, and then also how are you going to, right, take care of yourself or just survive these pieces where you need to practice surrender as well.
Right.
So
yes,
that was kind of the first big thing, is we had that joint intention that we were going to prioritize kids' well-being, and both agreed that they didn't choose this. They would never choose this, that we're the ones that brought them into this world, accepted this huge responsibility of prioritizing their development, right? Making sure they're safe and healthy. And so again, that was very central. And we kind of shaped our plan for how to tell them, around that. I read a lot, I researched a lot, and being just my background in education was fortunate for some just understanding of their developmental stages and kind of what they needed to hear and understand at the time of our divorce. And they were young, they were 4, 7, and 9 at the time. And so we eventually settled on needing to tell them 3 things. And that was, we love you no matter what. You are loved. And this, meaning divorce, has nothing to do with you. Just trying to kind of prevent some dangerous misunderstanding, right? Just making that explicit, right? This has nothing to do with you. And that we will always be a family, right? And our family's going to look different, right? Dad's not going to live here. We're getting divorced. And just explaining what that even is to them, what that means. But then also, right, again, being very clear, like, parents don't divorce kids. And again, that's our fortunate situation. Both parents were around.
Right.
I know it looks different. I've talked to people where, right, one parent has checked out, taken off. That conversation
so many
would look different.
I think there are so many different situations for divorce. So I'm noticing in myself, like, wanting to take care of viewers a little bit who may have already gone through a messy divorce, and how guilt-inducing even talking about ideal or healthy ways of divorcing, like what they look like. So
yes,
we acknowledge that, right? We acknowledge this idea of
that's so, and I almost, I'm glad you bring it up, because I find myself almost feeling sometimes like I'm so grateful, but then also so guilty that I understand this story is more the exception than the norm, especially having both parents on so much of the same page in terms of, like, the child-centered communication and planning and being able to, right, just even make a co-parenting plan at all is unusual. So maybe this is an okay time to speak to,
finish, to speak to what?
That how hopefully empowering it is to just control. You can only control yourself, right? And if you can show up as an authoritative parent, right? Meaning like high warmth, high engagement, right? There's things you can do to protect relationships with your kids. And even if it's starting today, and I've witnessed parents, tell their kids like, I'm so sorry, I wish I did that differently. And that's like so powerful. If your kids, like, it's just never too late to have a conversation or to reset or to think like, I'm going to do this a little bit differently. And yeah, just remembering whatever your kid's relationship looks like with the other parent, you can't control. And that's impossibly hard. And I have so much empathy for that. And if I honestly, I can't even tell you what I would do if I had a co-parent that I thought would put the kids in the middle of a very vicious divorce. I don't know. That's terrifying. And I'm sorry for that. But I've also seen single parents just foster these beautiful relationships with their kids and understanding that this is part, like, your kids are their own autonomous beings too. Like, you can't, this is part of their story, right? My parents got divorced when I was 4, when I was 7, when I was 9.
That's right.
I love that. I'm curious about one dynamic that I think probably influences a lot of acrimonious divorces. And this may or may not be relevant, and it may or may not be something you're comfortable with. But I imagine that sometimes the acrimony comes from one person rejecting the other. In other words, it's not really a mutual decision. It's one was unfaithful, or one just decides they love someone else or want out, and the other one doesn't. And it seems like the one who is rejected might have, unless there's some big violence that leads the person who's leaving, emotional or physical, to want to leave, or some big betrayal. Like, usually it's one rejecting another, or maybe often. And so I wonder if that was at play at all, if you even want to share that or are comfortable.
Yeah.
And or if it was a totally mutual decision, if that's part of what made it maybe relatively more amicable, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. So I actually write about this because we kind of waffled back and forth between, and I call it just this dysfunctional dance, where one of us would be like, okay, we need to get divorced. And then the other one would super backpedal and be like, no, we're not going to do that. And one of my still most salient, I feel like, memories of this, we got divorced, officially divorced. It was March 2018. Okay. But if you go back to like January 2017, so over a year before we were officially divorced, we were in that same limbo land, and we had an appointment with a mediator that, like, we needed to leave for, like, right then. And I had just this moment of sheer panic where I'm like, we can't do this. We can't. Right. So it was when my then husband was very resolved and being like, let's move forward. Right. We've got to get this process started. We can't, this is not sustainable. And I completely just melted down. Right. I just was sobbing, like literally begging him, like I've never begged anybody, to please, let's not go to this mediator appointment. I don't want to get divorced. I begged him to go skiing. We ultimately, because we already, kids were at a sitter, we just needed, so I think it's common you reach these places of maybe one partner feels resolved and pretty confident that this is what needs to happen. And then the other just, I think that's human nature, right? I can't, and your brain, right? Your brain is so concerned with keeping you safe more than it is with keeping you necessarily happy or fulfilled or, self-actualized. Mm-hmm. And I just completely lost it at the thought of, divorce and losing that core attachment. And so he conceded and we went skiing, but it was very, in hindsight, I wish I had been brave enough or open enough to sit with that rejection, because that's what it felt like, right? He is wanting to go to the mediator. He is wanting to get divorced. He is wanting to put this,
He's green lighting it,
all
moving
in
forward.
motion.
Yeah.
And so, yes, feeling I wanted to change his mind. I wanted, right? I just wanted so badly for things to be different. And so I slowed it down, right? For another year. By January of the next year, we'd finally finished filing everything. But I absolutely, if there weren't so for me, feeling like rejected at that point, if there weren't kids, I think I could have very quickly and very easily gotten ugly and gotten just vindictive and, fought over everything and tried to make him miserable. Because I absolutely think, right, that's something that we're kind of naturally, like self-preservation, tend to do, right? Like we feel hurt and hurt back. So it was absolutely my kids and that very core drive to make our decision to get divorced, not their pain, even though it's of course going to be inevitably painful for them, but as
That
to
you don't
hold
add
as
to
much of that as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about your kids too?
Uh-huh.
You had mentioned that one of you, when you decided to get divorced, your oldest was 9.
Yes.
Was there discussion, and maybe not because you guys had already left the church, but was there discussion about them getting baptized, like pressure from your active member families or the ward or anything like that?
There was, so when he had turned 8 or was about to turn 8, there was definitely pressure. I know grandparents were probably hoping that he would get baptized, but I do remember, this is another good backfire story, but we got delivered some Great to Be 8 packet. And I remember looking through it, and there was a page like what you should think, what you should know, and what you should feel for your baptism day. And I was instantly like, nope, not getting baptized. And that was close to, let's see, and that was shortly after, so the November 5th, 2015, right? Then the very next, so that happened. I stopped going. I stopped taking kids. The next year is when my son would have been turning 8 and he got delivered that packet. And that's when I decided none of us are going to be members. He's not getting baptized. And then I officially resigned.
Wow.
For those who don't know, the November 5th, 2015 was when the Mormon Church basically declared doctrinal war on same-sex married couples in response to the United States Supreme Court legalizing same-sex marriage. That's just a shortcut for what happened, but
yeah, no,
you didn't like that.
I didn't like that. And I had kind of rationalized taking my kids for social reasons up until that. And I think I still had some, hope in more nuanced big tent space for our family. But after that, that was just very where it's like, it's not kind, right? I never want my kids to think, I was just not okay with them being affiliated, me being affiliated. So we stopped going. Kids weren't baptized yet.
Can I just ask how they felt about that? Like, I don't know if you're open to sharing, but because you said that they were going, you had the 6-year-old in primary, and I know 8 is really young to, or your other kids were really young. Did they feel like a loss of not going? Did they really want to go, or were they totally fine stepping away?
They were, the youngest one was fine stepping away. I mean, she was in nursery. It was funny. I think somebody asked her what she remembered about church, a little bit later. And all she remembered was the sample cups, the water cups. That's all she's like, I just remember some sample cups. So yeah, she was fine. The older 2 I don't remember it being overly stressful, but we had a lot of conversations with them about it. And we gave them because we knew it would come up so often in our community. I really wanted them prepared with like answers and an understanding. So I would explain, like, your friends that go to church, their parents decide, right? They're going to church because their parents have decided their family's going to church, right? So when your friends ask, why don't you go to church? Like, my parents have decided we don't go to church. So I did try to help them with that kind of ownership. Like, my parents
That's so helpful.
have, yeah.
Right.
And
Just-
even words, like giving them things to say if you know they're going to be asked about it.
Yes. And
So
do you want to,
helpful.
can I just share one conversation that was like the most, for how stressed I was about like my kids not going to church and how it might affect their friendships and just their school in this very Mormon valley. So, and they would have things like, you know, hear things from friends. One friend had said, you know, well, my parents don't like me going to your house because there's a coffee maker, and just these funny, just so very funny cultural things. But I would overhear these conversations with my kids and just be so tempted, just want to rescue them. Cause I'm like, they didn't choose this. I chose this. And I don't want them to be uncomfortable. And right, that's not my response anymore. But at the time, my son, and I know it was the result of conversations we've had about leaving the church. We talked to him about why we felt it was important to not support it anymore, and talked a lot about just love and what we believed love was and how that was different from things that we felt the Mormon church was sharing. So I heard my son must have been maybe 7 at the time. And a friend was like, why don't you go to church? And he used what we talked about. Oh, my parents just decided we don't go to church. He's like, okay, you don't go to church, but do you go to another church? He's like, no. And the friend was like, well, you believe in God though, right? And my son's like, I don't know. And I'm like holding my breath. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to have no friends. He's going to have no friends. And this friend is just like, what do you mean you don't know? And I'm like, oh my goodness, he's such a little sponge. He's like, well, different religions believe in different gods and nobody really knows which God. So I don't know. And
Wow.
his friend was like, well, what do you believe in? And I just hear this like wait time, and I'm like forcing myself to not go like jump in and fill it. And he's just like, love. I believe in love. And it was just the first time that I'm like, oh my gosh, we did the right thing. Like, it's going to be fine. Like, he's fine. If that's his answer for the rest of his life, this is just perfectly fine. And
Even Jesus would agree.
I know.
It's the Jesus I think about.
Yeah. Well, he also had a really good friend and family, different friend, leaving a kind of on the same timeline. And that friend's mom she was just really good and witty about it. But along the lines of that, November 5th policy, she started telling her kids, she's like, being Mormon's getting in the way of me being Christian. So we don't go to church anymore. So there was conversation. He was exposed to some different ideas around it. But yeah, that was huge. And then just to kind of piggyback, different story, but same thing with divorce. I was terrified of my kids having to answer those questions, right? And my youngest, she was 5, and I hear a friend be like, where's your dad? And I'm like, instantly frozen again. I was like, oh, I have to answer. And, oh, he's not here. She's like, what do you mean? Because this was like probably evening play date. She's like, he's probably at his apartment. And her friend's like, what? He doesn't live here? Like, that was so foreign. And my 5-year-old's like, no, my parents are divorced, but there are bunk beds and a pool there. She didn't think twice. Like, I was holding on to all this, like scarcity and fear for her. And right. And her friend's like, oh, can we go swim? right? It's like, if you, so yeah, all that to say, it was really important. I never wanted the kids to feel like the choice to leave the church or the fact that their parents are divorced. I'm like, that's not embarrassing. That's
Right.
not wrong. Like,
Right.
it's what is.
Yeah.
Right. It's what has been right for our family. So I've been honestly so pleasantly surprised at how well my kids have figured out their outgroup minority.
Right.
Wow. So let me just recap what I've heard so far.
Okay.
The things that you did to make your divorce more versus less healthy. You waited until you weren't in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of got on the same page as it related to core things like religion.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of made the agreement that it was going to be a child-centered divorce. You talked about it in very simple terms with the kids to reassure them. It sounds like you got a conscious uncoupling coach,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes, I did.
And then you gave each other time to process the ping pong back and forth of regret, but then determination, regret, determination. Those are some of the main things I've heard so far.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's going to be a lot of people that are like, there's got to be more to it. You know what I mean?
Yes. And I think the more to it piece is, well, I do feel like this primary buy-in of prioritizing kids is key. And there are so many just incredible resources on that. Another one that's just coming to mind right now, and it's a short, very succinct article, but like, divorce is the most important story you will ever tell your kids. Just that it has the potential to, like, it's going to stick with them regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you're the adult right now, right? Between you and your kids, you're the only one with a fully developed frontal cortex. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do what it takes, like, to be able to make decisions in line with that intention of prioritizing kids.
Yeah.
So I think that will forever be central. And then also managing, well, probably tabling expectations. Don't go in with a lot of expectations, but and this is one that came up like with my uncoupling coach, with so many things that I read, just know like that first year at least is hell, right? And hopefully with a right ton of work after that, like, you're moving towards like the healthiest and happiest your expanded family has ever been. But there's just no skipping that really awful, hard heaviness. And I think we see a lot of couples, it's so tempting to want to escape that hell, right? So we do things that are super counterproductive and create more problems trying to escape, whether it's like the unhealthy coping, the unhealthy, so
distress tolerance, that sort of thing,
right?
Emotion regulation,
So try to get the support, the resources you need to survive, right? Those really, really low points, to have the tools, right? To have the coping, to have the plan for self-care and self-compassion, and realize that you need to like prioritize that if you're going to show up for your kids. And that was a huge thing, right? My own uncoupling coach was like, because I kept being like, the kids. And she knew, because we were just Zooming on my phone. She's like, you can't do anything for the kids from your bathroom floor. So we need to back up, because I was just crying on my bathroom floor. She's like, so we're going to back up and just these baby steps. And, there were things that she was really good about too, like challenge, like no sex or alcohol for at least 6 months. Like that was one of her as an uncoupling coach, like non-negotiables.
Dang.
She's like, because you will not be engaging with either of those things in a healthy place 6 months.
Wait, with each other or with
divorce with anyone. She's like,
Holy
you're
moly.
going to be alone and like figure this out. Right. And that was something that she said she pretty much insists on before she'll work with somebody, because if you're going to go unproductively cope, we're just going to drag this out instead of make any progress.
You're not ready. Maybe.
So, yeah.
I'm noticing already like how challenging it might feel as you're talking about kind of having the resources for yourself during that one year, and what a challenge it could feel like if you're trying to balance basically this whole new life.
Yeah.
And whether you have to go to work right away, you're all of a sudden
trying
job,
to, like
right?
a brand new,
like trying to find a job. You're grieving. You're actively grieving the loss of likely something you didn't anticipate happening. So it could be like, even if it's the right decision, or right, you know that it's kind of the good thing to do.
Yeah.
There's still likely grief involved. And then also being a parent, and then also trying to show up with the co-parent,
right,
in a way and it just feels like so much.
So much. It honestly does. And when you list it out, I'm like, it honestly feels impossible. And I think that is such a very common sense, right, for so many in that place. Another huge key, I think, helpful tool, I guess, that was instrumental in kind of shaping how our divorce and co-parenting relationship played out was, and this is from the conscious uncoupling philosophy, but is kind of understanding the difference between like boundaries, but then also gestures of goodwill. Because so many people, like with divorce, yes, boundaries are super important, but it gets very easy to refuse gestures of goodwill and like call it like, no, that's my boundary. That's my boundary. And so I would be challenged like by my own coach, like, is this a gesture of goodwill you can't afford? And that I would usually say like, nope, I can't. I can't do that. I can't. And there were some times I wasn't ready, but.
And you may have been in a state of overwhelm where like in reality, you have so much that you're giving out to people that is, I think, a place where you're like, nope, actually I'm tapped out.
Yes. And that's an important, right, distinction that you learn to make. And sometimes I would need to leave and I would go for a run. Right. Other times but it was also this practice of like exploring, like, is this a gesture of goodwill?
Yes.
Or is this no, I need space? And so it's probably one of the first examples. I call this, like in hindsight, I called this second hardest thing I did after telling the kids about divorce. Telling the kids about divorce was hands down the hardest, most heartbreaking. Just nothing felt the same after that. That was rough. But second to that was probably like 6 months later, my former brother-in-law was getting married. And I'd known him since he was 5. And the extended family was trying to honor all these things we'd asked, right? We had explicitly communicated with close friends and family how we hoped they would respond to our divorce, how we hoped they would treat our kids. We did a lot of explicit coaching, I feel like, ourselves, trying to set our kids up for success. So anyways, in line with trying to like honor this request, they had invited me to the wedding. And I was like, there's no way. There is no way I'm going to a wedding. I was super bitter about marriage anyway. And I was like, people don't do this. Like divorced people don't go to their former in-laws' weddings. Like this is silly.
And then the in-laws are going to be like, oh, she's so bitter. She doesn't even come to accept her invitation. I'm not saying they did that. but
No,
like,
well, yeah.
that's the way
So
humans can be.
I'm talking this through with my uncoupling coach, thinking she is going to just totally validate, like, that is so unreasonable that they would think you'd come, that. And she would just like challenge some point. She's like, well, what do your kids feel? And they really wanted me to come. And okay, they, your former in-laws have extended this invitation, probably as a result of this communication you shared, which I did. I drafted this whole thing about wanting just nothing but big love for our kids, right? We really expected nobody to point fingers or take sides, like very clear, like, do not speak negatively of either parent around the kids, like just shared those expectations. So she's pointing out all these things about, right, just helping me explore if my going might be a gesture of goodwill. I ultimately decided to go, and it was hard. It was really hard to just be in that environment and see my kids off taking pictures with the family that I just dissolved like any legal connection to.
Yeah.
But at the end, I feel like it communicated what I really wanted our kids to feel, that we're still a family. Mom and dad will show up for you guys when you're hoping, for a family event. Because the girls, they were little and flower girls, and it was, right? I was like glad to be there, but it was, I don't know why I remember it being so, because now I'm like, oh, that'd be easy. I would totally go right to some wedding. But at the time it felt just next to impossible. But having somebody else, like a more objective, removed person pointing out, like just challenging, like that might be a gesture of goodwill. And then the more I feel like I made, the more my co-parent was returning, and that I could totally see going either way, right? Because there were times where instead of being like gracious and kind, I was super defensive and cruel. And then that triggered a very similar response in him, right? Or vice versa.
Yeah.
So it really was a collaboration in that way. But I'm convinced any divorce can be horrifically messy.
Yeah.
Right. The more, if you like repeat, because every time, right, you repeat a behavior, it's easier to repeat again and again. So if you just get used to responding really aggressively or really defensively, or just you're dead set on refusing to cooperate or concede ever, that's going to be, right, the story you shape. But as we both started kind of trying to lean in to gestures of goodwill, and just, we were lucky because I could always know, like, my kids love their dad. Like, why would I ever challenge or try to hurt or take away from that? And that made those gestures of goodwill a little bit easier.
Yeah. Do you know what it reminds me of, John, a little bit, as you're describing the process of you intentionalizing the divorce around, a child-centered experience, is ACT. Because really what you're kind of saying is you're going to have all sorts of feelings as you go through this process, which can oftentimes feel like a death. And so feel the feelings. Like we're going to have you, this is kind of acceptance, commitment therapy, like the general idea. You're going to have the feelings, feel the feelings. Like when you act, when you make a decision, have it be around values, because you can end up in all sorts of places we would never choose consciously if we just live what we feel.
Yeah, if you just follow your feelings. Yes. Oh, that's so wise. Yeah.
So I love that. I was just recognizing that as she was explaining it.
Yeah. So acceptance and commitment therapy is relevant as a modality. Secular Buddhism is where acceptance and commitment therapy gets most of its ideas. So that's also a useful tool. I was just about to recommend a cousin to acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's called dialectical behavioral therapy. And stick with me here. I do think in this one small instance, my background in psychology might be useful. So one of the hardest things that I felt as a therapist was dealing with people who were engaged in self-harm. So they would, come to me as clients with cuts all up and down their arms and legs. And I know this is kind of triggering for people, but
So maybe trigger warning.
But self-harm was really hard for me because I felt like I got to cure them of not cutting themselves. You know what I mean? And I learned pretty quickly why people cut themselves. It's not, a main reason is they're feeling so much stress, so much pain, so much distress that like cutting themselves helps distract themselves from the emotional, psychological pain that they're experiencing. So in that sense, it's actually helping them cope. It's emotion regulation. It's distress tolerance, just in a way that's harming them. But it's actually, in some ways, keeping them alive. So there's a form of therapy that got developed for people who are self-harming and or have what's called borderline personality disorder. And the therapy is called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. It's developed by a woman out of University of Washington named Marsha Linehan. And it's just all about when your emotions are so big that you're screaming or losing your temper or self-harming or suicidal, what do you do, right? And it's the only really well-established form of therapy for that just deep emotional dysregulation. And as I was going through it myself in my training, I realized this stuff is really valuable, not just for people with borderline personality disorder, not just for suicidal people or people self-harm, but for people who have really big emotions. And I just had the realization, I think somebody out there could make a lot of money learning DBT, training for DBT, and then using it for couples who are about to get divorced.
I'm going to do it.
Yeah. No, you could be the first.
Seriously?
It's called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. And it's just all about mindfulness and meditation and values and, healthy coping and healthier forms of coping versus less healthy forms of coping.
Regulating your nervous system.
Yeah,
but
your nervous system. Yeah.
So it's so perfect because I feel like pretty much, honestly, every parent, divorcing couples I've talked to, everyone wants to protect their kids. Everyone wants to have a smooth divorce. They want these things, but they spiral because it is just impossible to show up how you want or need to achieve those things with how dysregulated and how much pain you're in. And how, just those huge emotions. So I did have to make a plan for when I could not engage in a healthy way with my co-parent.
So you were aware
we
of
wouldn't
that.
We wouldn't engage, The days that we could not show up in a way that would, that we could honor that intention of filtering words and behavior through protecting the family.
Yeah.
And I would go run. She's like, what's the plan for when the ugliest version of yourself shows up?
Yep.
What is the plan?
Yeah.
And for me, that was running.
Oh, yeah.
So,
well, that's fascinating. And I think, and I was just going to say, one person's dysregulation then triggers the other person's dysregulation. And and the attorneys are just cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. The more conflict, the better.
And I think even what I've heard about the process legally of getting divorced is that it feeds oftentimes, just the very structure and process of it is it kind of feeds animosity. It feeds this sense of you're against each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is so
challenging.
Sad. And I've been lucky to meet. We did not use an attorney divorcing, even though I highly recommend that's part of an important support. If you are in a high conflict divorce situation, I would definitely advise get a therapist, get a lawyer, do what it takes to get objective about what's equitable, what's fair, and then move forward, to forever fight about things is just, it's so sad. And I think there are absolutely, all that to say, I feel like I've encountered some lawyers that are very, divorce lawyers, honest about that. Let's expedite this. What needs to happen? What is fair? Let's move on. But I think there's some that are Oh,
Let's
you
go to
want to
war.
pick this ridiculous battle and pay me to pick this ridiculous battle? Like,
I'm in.
okay.
I'm all in.
Like it feels like it would be
It's so
really
crazy.
helpful to have divorce attorneys that are educated around DBT and knowing about
Emotional
nervous.
regulation,
That's
yeah.
right. It's like, you know what? Actually, this is going to be key to what you're doing.
Well,
Yes.
Well, okay, so this is my next question. So I'm not ashamed to admit that a few years ago, Margie and I had a very high conflict situation that led to our separation. And so we were separated for a couple months, and we got a former attorney, former divorce attorney, who transitioned into being a mediator and then eventually a coach. So she knew how to do it all. And what we worked on was something called a structured separation, where it was like, well, okay, right now there's a lot of conflict, but you have a lot going for you. And, you know, you need to be separated right now, but maybe you want to have some ground rules to make it so it doesn't blow everything up and lead to divorce, because maybe we can work through things to get back together again. So we did that. We did a structured separation, and she helped us set up ground rules and rules for the separation. And we even, you know, saw her together during the separation, and we dated during the separation. And it was actually some of the funnest dates we've had have been when we were separated, believe it or not. But anyway, we ended up getting back together. But I'm wondering if you knew about the idea of a structured separation as a trial, and if you tried that at all.
That's a good question. And I explored it a little bit. We did not do any like trial separation before. Lots of that was due to just our circumstances, really. Like when we looked at, and I think there was a piece that, and this might have been, we both weren't mature enough to explore a separation further because of that rejection piece, right? Maybe it was a little bit easier to be like, I'm going to be done, right? Or I think if he had even asked for a trial separation, I would have felt too rejected to be like, no, I want a divorce, right? So for probably a variety of reasons, that wasn't on
that
like an
makes sense.
option for us. But that being said, I think it's amazing. There's resources
Choices
out there for that,
right? For different circumstances.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, for us, it was really overwhelming.
Okay.
Right. I was like, where would one of us go? Right. Like part of our agreement was refinancing the house and splitting the equity so that he'd be able to afford to move into an apartment kind of thing.
I think the
finance was definitely our piece that limited, I think, some options, and even
It's real.
Yeah.
And I also think, structured separation maybe has a bit more of a place if either you're unsure about that you want that divorce, or if you're in some ways trying to work through something in particular that just feels threatening in a moment, as opposed to like people who really know actually
or sure
we want to go through.
Right.
This is what we need.
Right.
Which
But I think I love that, actually, a structured separation that's not impulsive, right? With the ground rules, with a plan in place for moving forward and
there's
making decisions.
There's financial rules about how money's handled. There's rules about dating and sex and whether or not that's allowed or not. There's rules about kids and rules about working on the relationship. So anyway, the only other thing is some solution people have, and this is both in separation and divorce, is this idea of nesting, where the kids stay in the main residence, but the couple takes turns being with the kid in the primary home. And then there's an apartment or some other residence that the other goes to when it's not their week to be with the kids. And I just want to make sure people know that idea is called nesting, I believe, and that people do that both in separations and in divorces.
That's right.
As an option, to keep as much, again, if this is a child-centered,
right,
divorce or separation, that helps things stay as solid as possible for the kids versus the kids having to pack their bags and go to the here and pack their bags and go back here.
And that's, and we didn't start doing that. We started with an agreement where kids were at their dad's apartment for, X amount of nights every year is how it was set up in our decree. But thankfully we reached a place of being very just collaborative and open to kind of following certain, not that the kids make all the decisions ever, but as the kids got older, like after a few years, they really just wanted to be in their home, which is I stayed in the family home, and they were just wanting to be there. And their dad was so awesome about that. Just didn't feel threatened by them wanting to just be with the majority of their things or be where their friends are.
Right.
And because we have this cordial relationship, he honestly, I feel like, sees them more now, even though they're sleeping every night in the family home, but he sees them all the time, right? And they're texting him, right? They're older, they're calling him, they're making plans with him. So, but I've seen situations where it'd be so tempting. And even if it were me, I would insist on no, this is my time with you. You have to be here. But that's another piece I'm so grateful for, is he didn't resist there and just supported them. And I don't see that it's hurt their relationship at all. I really feel that it's enhanced it. He has, they have good relationships with their dad.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a natural place to go next, is just, things that have been positive or surprising that have come out of the divorce.
Yes. So that's I have one more favorite story about, this one's with my oldest son again, but a couple years after the divorce. So he was 11 at the time of this conversation, and it just seemed super out of the blue. We were driving to one of his sports practices, and he was like, "Why'd you and Dad get divorced?" And I was just frozen again. I was like, "We did this years ago," right? I used to live in this terrified anticipation of that conversation, and I've done it. We're in a good spot. What do I say? But then I also, normally we just have very open communication, and I'm glad he's asking me, but it really caught me off guard. And at that moment, it just kind of circled back to those, because I didn't want to mess it up. I just went back to those kind of three things and just said, "I'm sorry. I feel like as we all get older and as more time passes, we'll all have a better understanding of it, but I don't have a better answer, right? Other than those, we love you. We're a family. It had nothing to do with you, right?" And he was disappointed with that response. But I went on to talk to one of my good friends she's, I think, just brilliant marriage and family therapist. She became that years after my own divorce. But I was talking to her about my son, and I was like, "He asked me why we got divorced. I don't even know what to do with that." And she was just so helpful. She's like, you don't answer that for him. You can't answer that. And that's not really what he's looking for, right? He's looking for help making sense of his story. He's looking for support integrating this fact of his life, right? He's 11. He's noticing most of my friends' parents aren't divorced. My parents are divorced, but they're friends, right? He probably just has so many questions. And even it's almost not fair to give kids, again, depending on the age, but a reason. Because even my reasons behind the divorce still seem to be evolving, right? If I had given him a reason when he was 9, it was already a totally different reason when he was 11. So if I'm still making sense of reasons myself as an adult, I don't need to try and communicate that to my kids at that time, because it's going to change. Even things I would have really felt like people needed to know this about our marriage or our divorce at the time, I'm like, they're either just completely irrelevant or like even inaccurate now. So this friend advised, she's like, ask him questions, like just be open to talking about it. Ask him what's it like for you that your parents are divorced? What do you remember about the divorce, or what do you feel? And so I did. When I revisited that with him, I just said, what's it like for you that dad and I are divorced? And the conversation we had, and I had to be so aware to not like interject and try to give him answers, because I could recognize like I was scared, right? I'm scared of his answers. I'm scared of what I'm going to learn, right? Divorce did to him. But he was able, like, I'm shocked for 11 years old to just articulate. He's like, I was really sad. I remember being really sad when you told us. I was really sad when dad moved out. And so he had like these really sad memories, but then he went on to be like, but I still see dad and we still do some things all together. So we'll still like go on hikes together or have certain things that we're able, to do as a entire family. And he eventually commented, he's like, yeah, I guess everything just kind of seems better this way.
Aw.
It was the most I just didn't even realize how much guilt, right? Just that like conditioned guilt over divorce I'd been carrying until he said that. And I was like, I thought we hid any marriage problems. I thought that, right, our kids would never be nothing but sad that we're divorced. But he was, I think, expressing not that he could totally articulate it, but kids are sponges, right? For whatever that energy was that they were living with in that marriage that just wasn't super healthy, wasn't super authentic, they could feel that, right? So he's like, everything seems better this way, I think, is him just being like, oh yeah, just living and being, and like our family is functioning like better this way. So that was huge. I should mention, like, that same conversation with my girls wasn't as miraculous, right? If anything, they were more sad than not about it. But also, like, maybe the win there is that they're able to talk about it too, right? They're sad that I don't go to grandma and grandpa's with them, right? Their dad's side of the family parties. They're sad that they wanted me to sleep over at dad's apartment with them. They still understandably wanted us to do everything together all the time. And so, yeah, they didn't have the same like guilt alleviating feedback that my oldest did, but they were able to talk about it, and without this sense of it being a taboo thing, right? They're just,
it can be open.
Yeah.
That's great. How about for you? Some of the positives or surprising things for you individually that came from the divorce?
Yeah, I think the divorce, and right, if we go back even further to the faith crisis and then divorce, it feels like I just figured out how I want to like show up and engage with the world. And I just feel like myself in a way that I just wasn't aware before was a way to feel, if that makes sense. Because I was trying to, I think, just fit into all these roles that I thought were important or that I needed to fill. And now I love this idea, and I know it's from Eckhart Tolle, but I had first come across it in all the faith crisis reading and trying to figure out what else I was wrong about. It's like this never ending rabbit hole. But he talks about just presence, which I'd never known how to like just be present before, and this idea of space to be. And I finally just feel like there's space to be. And yeah, it feels good, and it feels amazing to give my kids their own space to be. I think tabling all these shoulds, whether it's about like church membership or marriage, really was this catalyst for making sure I don't put any of those on my kids. Right. And I love that. Just this front row seat to watching them grow up with space to be.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, it's been, things are good, good right now.
I was going to ask you too, it came out last night at dinner, this idea of, the empowerment of doing something incredibly physically difficult and mentally difficult with these 100-mile races or like runs that you do. Do you want to just talk a minute about that? I think it's interesting that it emerged.
Yes.
That it emerged at a time of, loss of control, deep suffering, some of those themes.
Yes. No, I'd love to. It's been interesting to watch or just kind of notice my relationship with running evolve. I love Utah. I love the Utah mountains. I love the Utah desert. Grew up hiking and backpacking, skiing and running. And the first piece of writing actually that was of mine that was ever published was about like mid-faith crisis. It was titled Return to the Mountains. And I didn't even at the time intentionally be like, I need to start running again, or I need to start trail running. I need to go back to the mountains. But it's just where I ended up when I felt my sense of self completely unraveling and everything felt turned upside down. And yeah, I just found myself spending more time running and on the trails. And then later with the divorce, that was one of my like very planned coping skills with my own uncoupling coach, right? When you can't regulate, when you can't be sure that you aren't going to say and do things that you wish you could take back, right? Like the plan is go for a run, like move this energy. It was so effective at moving some really sad energy. And so for a while I ran to like cope, and it was definitely like heavier. I would run and I have these trails that I remember just sobbing on. I have so many memories of different things in different seasons running around these mountains. And then after the divorce, running, it just like became easier almost because I had this totally different metric, right? I was like, oh, in the past, I would have thought this was so hard, but this is nothing compared to, telling the kids their parents are getting divorced, or this would have felt like miserable, except it's nothing compared to taking off my wedding ring for the last time, right? All these new comparisons that made it feel easy. But now, so I moved from like through this like running just to survive and cope, running out of comparing like this hard to something that was way harder. And now I still like run regularly, but it's just from a place of gratitude, really. Like I just am so like grateful to be out, grateful for like body movement and just the balance I feel like it brings to my day. So yeah,
you're very, very grateful because 100 miles is very, very long.
Modest,
that is a long way to be grateful.
Yeah, she runs centuries. She's an ultra marathoner, 100 miles in a single run.
Wow.
That's, I think I'm done with the last one. I don't plan to do any more because that is long. Yeah. I like sleep too much.
I'm a couple of just micro questions. I'm curious what wisdom you have to share around alimony and child support and those types of financial negotiations around the divorce. Are there do's and don'ts around there or not? And then I want to talk about child custody.
Yes, I'm probably not I don't know if I'm a good one to ask about this because I've been told by a lot of people I did it wrong. So I was so opposed. I did not want to fight about any resources. My former husband was great to say, you stay in the house. That's literally all I cared about at the time. I wanted to stay in the house with the kids. Like I needed that was that was like my sole focus. And I just did not want to fight about money. I had obtained my teaching job. He was happy to pay child support. And I did not ask for alimony or any of his retirement, which, again, I've been told was very unwise. And you probably can't count on doing that. And if you don't have like who my spouse was on the other end. So I don't know how much. So I'll say that we didn't fight about money ever. And that was largely me not probably asking for anything but child support.
Okay.
And then even the house, we split the equity. But he has
So
been.
you made the house payments by staying when you stayed in the house?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah, but I'm very house poor. So all that to say, we didn't fight about money through the divorce. And he has been, and it was like my living situation was really stressful for a couple of years. And then I finally just reached out to him and said, I don't know what to do. It's not really sustainable for me. I might need to look at selling the house. And he has been so open. He just very proactively took over a ton of kid payments, like tumbling tuition and this and that. And like just after that conversation, and again, this had been years of since the divorce, years of not fighting over money and things. And within minutes of like that conversation, I had a notification on my phone that he'd transferred, money, and he just started sending more for child support.
Oh,
And I don't know how that came about other than he is very like whatever the kids need. Right. But he will also point out that he feels I've never claimed kids needed something and it was for this. Right. So I think we've tried to be very transparent in kid expenses, and we're lucky that we're on the same page in terms of wanting to continue to support, right? Like the hobbies kids were involved in at the divorce, they've been able to remain involved and like continue to pursue because of him. Like he's totally taken that on. So yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have great advice other than decide what's equitable, right? What's fair, what's going to set kids up for success.
That's cool. It's a good story though.
I hope.
Okay. The next questions are on custody. And I have one of my favorite stories ever about it, but I'll have you start. What do you have thoughts around custody?
Well, again, I am lucky that through our divorce, I was like, my kids are safe with their dad, right? So I didn't want to fight about custody. And this is another place he was really generous. We did joint legal custody, but I have on the decree sole physical custody because that allowed me more child support and to claim kids on taxes. And so really, but he was going to trust that I wasn't going to not let him see them or anything. So that was for like financial reasons. So joint
a lot of
legal,
trust there, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Back to that, like even when we didn't trust each other really at all, like there was very like raw, complicated, hard feelings, but I don't think either of us trusted our prioritizing the kids. Right. So he knew I was not going to keep kids away from him. So I like any setup though, but back to custody, I like anything that helps the kids have, because especially when they're young, like you have so many big questions and concerns and like worries about divorce, but your 4-year-old's probably like, who's making me breakfast in the morning, right? Like how can you preserve their just sense of routine and feeling stable and just make that again the forefront of deciding custody over when you want to see them, right? And I've seen in education, and maybe this works for some, I'm sure they make it work, but I've seen kids that go literally every other day to the other parent's home. And I think that's hard, right? They're missing something from mom's house or dad's house or, right? So whatever, 18 years with your kids goes so fast and then they're out of the house, right? How can you, help those 18 years be like stable and safe and happy for them?
Okay, great. Can I tell my story really quick?
Yes, please. I'm
Okay.
excited.
So I'll give a context that, and that was beautiful, by the way. I'll give a disclaimer that this is through the recounting of my friend, not his ex-spouse. So
Okay.
I don't have all the story, but this is how my friend told me the story. So my friend loses his faith. He's married to a devout woman. Long story short, they were really close friends, loved each other, but she wanted to be with the priesthood holder and he stopped believing. So she wanted a divorce. So, and they have a couple kids, kind of middle school, high school kind of age. And so in the divorce proceedings, I think she was probably feeling a lot of anger, resentment, frustration, because he did change the deal, right?
Right. Yeah.
They got married in the temple and it was all about the church, and then he left. So I'm sure she was angry. Long story short is she wanted full custody of the kids. And he wanted joint custody. And it was really, really hard for him. But he just told me, I'm giving her full custody. I'm not even gonna contest it. And I'm like, dude, you gotta fight it, like fight for it, And he said, no, I'm just gonna drop the rope. And that's a term from ACT where you just, instead of pulling on the rope and exhausting both parties, you drop the rope and you just, don't just refuse to fight. So he drops the rope and he just grants her full custody and, breaks his heart. The kids just go move in with her. And now he's living alone. And like, he, barely gets to see his kids. And I just thought, wow, man, I hope this turns out well. And sure enough, like, the mom really wants, her kids to be righteous in the church. And it's tough with teens these days in the Mormon church, even if both parents are married and faithful. But so, the kids started feeling all that pressure and that's why the mom wanted full custody. She was worried that the kids were going to lose their faith, because if they were around their non-believing dad too much,
right,
they lose their faith. So that's why she wanted full custody. So sure enough, she gets full custody. She's trying to do everything she can to make sure they stay faithful. But like at the end of the day, kids are going to do what they're going to do. And I think they felt that pressure, and I think they missed their dad. And I think over time, I think the mom got, I don't know, more and more frustrated, or just realized that there was writing on the wall. And weirdly, at some point, the kids, one or both of the kids, asked if they could go live with dad. And at some point, both kids are living with the dad, even though he full custody. Now, he wasn't like,
right.
He wasn't vindictive. He was like, I think by that point, the ex-wife was like, just like in despair and probably going through her own grieving and mourning. And so long story short, he ended up with both the kids, and at least for a time, until she healed and whatever. And then they grew up and whatever. The point was by not going to war and dropping the rope in this case, and I'm sure she was very reasonable and kind and loving about it, that he ended up getting full custody without even going to war over it. And that's just, surely everyone's situation is going to be different. But I thought that was kind of a cool and a powerful story, again, about you drop the rope, you don't inject the acrimony, you're both doing your best to care about what's best for the kids. Sometimes two people in good faith are going to arrive at whatever's best for the kids without the war and without the acrimony and without the legal constructs. And again, don't follow my advice, talk to your attorneys or
mine.
Do what's best for you. Right?
It's a story.
But it's a story, but I think I see that similar, right? Like a similar theme of parents who most will only fight for so long, right? You run into some that are like just crazy vindictive and will never have any concept of dropping the rope, right? But it seems like one will finally realize we can't do this forever, and talk about a long game, right? Where you see kids less, or you lose all this control of what narratives they're being told away from you, which is so stressful.
Yeah.
But again, if you keep focusing on what you can control in terms of relationship building with them, whatever that looks like, I do think they will sense that genuineness. And yeah, it's interesting when that's not the first time I've heard of kids asking to spend more time or live with the not full custody parent. So,
Okay.
it's interesting.
The next question I had is around dating, and I'm sure it's triggering. If I'm assuming your ex-husband dated at some point and or got married, I imagine that could be very emotional or triggering for you, and vice versa. And then there's a question of like introducing significant others into your children's lives.
Yeah.
Anything you want to share about that?
Good questions. So this was another agreement, and this is something that I can't say, right? Like recommend from a like solid, wise place, because I made it completely out of a scarcity place. But in the divorce decree, I insisted like we include kids will not meet a new partner of either of us for the first year. And that's not to say we could be off doing whatever we want, dating whoever we want, but kids aren't going to meet somebody new for the first year. And so I didn't touch alimony or his retirement, but I like made sure that was in there, and that was important to me. And again, just from wanting kids to have a year to like adjust to this new normal without meeting multiple new people. So not sure if that was wise. I think in hindsight, I feel like it was. It gave us all a year to readjust without this expanded family, like bringing another relationship in, and to just be able to prioritize. Like I think at the time I was really into family systems things, and like wanted relationships with kids and parents to feel primary, and not have kids feel that parents have replaced a primary relationship that's taking time and energy. Because as much as you want to think, or at least this was me, I was like, I can't like heal on my own. I can't show up for kids in the capacity that I want and invest in what I want to be like a next relationship to be healthy, right? That is like time and energy, like that's a commitment. So I knew I didn't or wouldn't be ready for that the first year. So that was one of our initial agreements. And then after that point, we agreed we're not going to talk about each other's dating life, right? Because we'd reached after a year or so, we are in this friendly co-parenting place. So we're like, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to ask about it. Let's just agree that we'll have the conversation when we're going to introduce somebody to the kids, right? When the kids are going to meet somebody. And after that point, I feel like I'm such a bad person to ask, because I am so, so scared of dating or opening that up again. And yeah, I feel this like really compelled to just be here and now with kids and not lose time to pursuing a relationship. But yeah, I have some work to do there. Once I got on, and the encouragement of a friend, she's like, you need to get on a dating app. Like, let's rip off the Band-Aid. She helped me make a profile. And I just cluelessly thought it was like by default private, and I would like at some point publish it. And I went to bed, and I woke up the next morning to like dust notification. And I think I like threw my phone across the room. It was like so unsettling that like this many people had like seeing my face, and I was like, this is probably how, you get murdered.
You're like, my life is over. I am now.
So I like hurried and deleted it. And yeah, have not made tons of progress since. But all that being said, we did share, even at the time of the divorce, shared this hope. And this kind of goes along with like reframing divorce. Like, what's the bigger tragedy? Parents getting divorced or parents raising kids with this like model of marriage that you would never want your kids to replicate themselves, right? So if we both agreed we were in a relationship that we wouldn't want our kids to be spending their own lives in, like, why are we modeling this? And so there was that hope that, right, kids get to see like a really healthy partnership where you're just like choosing each other like day to day, and like this makes sense for us to be together. And so yeah, I would say that's still a hope, but it's not not a bridge we've crossed yet as far as remarrying. I will say though, I have one more story about that. I used to be so paranoid, so scarcity about my kids spending time with their dad and a new partner. Like, I had so much like jealousy, and yeah, I was not in a good place about that for, I feel like, a long time. And same thing, my uncoupling coach, once again, she was like, well, the goal is you reach this co-parenting place where you're both healthy enough that whatever new partner you bring into this expanded family is going to just love your kids really big. They're going to be just like this awesome adult. And who wouldn't want another awesome adult in your kid's corner?
A bonus.
Right. And I'm like,
person.
now I never thought I would reach that place. I'm like, she's crazy. And now it's like, oh, if he came and told me that, right, he wanted kids to meet somebody, I just feel like I would adore her. And that's wild, because I used to like just detest this fictional girlfriend that I never met. And now we're totally in the place. I'm like, oh, I trust him to only bring somebody awesome around the kids.
4 great parents instead of 2.
Yeah.
Like, that's the ideal. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you see, there are some families that I'm like, oh, I would spend Christmas morning all together, right, with a new partner and with like, absolutely. But that was
like,
not right
I
away.
mean, some even talk about like Thanksgivings together
Yeah.
or vacationing together. Like, that seems kind of wild. And
Yeah.
it's probably, for some, it's never going to be a reality. But
And there's beauty, I think, in all those equations. Like, if it feels great for everyone, there's
Right.
beauty there. And if someone's boundarying around that because it doesn't feel great, there's beauty there.
Right.
we're waxing kind of idealistic right now. But what were we going to say about that?
No, that I would be I noticed myself, I've moved from a place where I'm like, I would never be open to that, right? That's where we're going to have to start sharing holidays or this or that, to now a place where I'm like, oh, we just have to see, right?
We'll see
the dynamic and yeah.
Got it. Were you going to say something, Julia?
Oh, no, I love that.
Okay.
Where you guys are at right now.
Yeah, it's a good spot.
So, I mean, as one of the final things for me that I was thinking of how to end this, I was thinking about when you shared the picture with the umbrellas.
Oh, yes.
And how meaningful that's been for you. And maybe we could provide a link or something where people can actually see what you're referring to, but you could describe it at least. And then what it means to you and what we've talked about today.
Okay. Yes. So I've started calling them wreck and rescue moments. Like, I've noticed myself in just various identity crises and just deep self-exploration, or whatever the, crossroads is. I come across these things, like, just feel so both wrecked and rescued and just kind of woken up. But it was during just mid-faith crisis, and I followed, and super grateful for Mormon Stories, because it was a place that I just felt less alone, and it was less just bleak. The future was less bleak. And you found things you could relate to when otherwise, right, in your more normal circles, you might question if you're the one, going crazy or wrong. But I came across this picture that John had posted, and it was this line of individuals. It's kind of this gray picture. All the individuals except one are just hunched under an umbrella. Their steps just look forced and sad. And the umbrella, essentially, it's like not even raining above them. They're carrying their own storm. So they have their umbrellas up, and it's storming all around them. And then except this one lone individual has closed the umbrella and looked up just to realize there's no storm at all. And that was very much my experience with leaving Mormonism. I was, right, you're just handed this umbrella at a really young age and told it's good for you and it's protecting you from the storm or from these bad things. And you need to keep it up even when it feels like heavy to carry, and even when you don't want to carry it, and even when it doesn't fill in line with, your core, what you want, right? The umbrella is good for you. And then closing it, right? Just life on the other side of, Mormonism has been so bright and happy and liberating and makes sense. And it's like, oh, I didn't need to carry that storm with me. And very similar, getting divorced was very similar, right? You feel like, keep the umbrella up. It's good. It's good for the family. It's what's best for kids. It's what you should do. Just kind of weather the storm. And then our experience with divorce was very similar. Upon closing it, it's like, oh, the world didn't end. Things, right, didn't totally fall apart. It was incredibly hard and scary to close it, and you don't know how to live without it right away afterward, right? That's that whole year of really scary unknowns. But yeah, then again, life on the other side is happy. Your son's telling you that things seem better this way. You have a better relationship. I mean, I have a better relationship with the father of my kids than we ever did married. So for us, yeah, that was definitely our experience of closing the umbrella.
Yeah.
And I love that image. And I think that's so powerful. You share so many things, and I know I'm not alone. I just have to tell you, I have another good friend who, when she heard I was getting to come chat with you guys, she was so excited and said, you have just been her safe space through a faith crisis. And and you just never know. You share one thing and it was trajectory changing because it resonates so much. So it's cool.
Thank you.
That's beautiful.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
So you've kind of turned all this learning into purpose in that you want to and have been helping people with their own divorces. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And then I don't know if you're even offering services to others who might, because we need lots of uncoupling coaches, right? I don't even know. Do you call yourself an uncoupling coach, or do you want to become an uncoupling coach? Or?
Yes. So the coaching practice kind of evolved organically and it's been the hugest compliment that anyone would, suggest anyone call and talk to me. But that is how it started, right? Somebody who knows me knows somebody else who's getting divorced, and ask about this, talk about how to talk to kids, or see, what they did. I had shared on social media a divorce announcement, which I think resulted eventually in directing a number of people towards asking about it, just because we shared a joint divorce announcement, which was a little different, and we just get asked so frequently about it. And so, yeah, it kind of reached a point where I needed to get a little more systematic about scheduling and about calls and about, chatting with parents who were either mid-divorce or looking for some co-parenting best practices. So, yeah, that's kind of come about. And I was already close just in schooling to obtaining my associate clinical mental health counseling license. So I'm in the process of finishing that because I would love to, support families in a more clinical capacity that way.
And so are you accepting clients?
Yes,
now,
for
or-
coaching. Yep.
Okay.
Very happy to do a quick consult call, see if it would be a good fit. I would love to, always chat co-parenting topics. So yes.
How do people find you?
I have a website, megcampbellcoaching.com. And then also I wrote a book with Grace and Gratitude, which is a memoir. It is not a self-help or how-to. It's just completely this story that I wrote down. It was a huge healing exercise. And then I don't know. I didn't even know if I'd share it, but then shared it with enough people to convince me to to move forward and publish it. But yeah, it's just the story of like our divorce and co-parenting.
And Julia will include all that in the show notes. And we should probably give a shout out to our friend Mindy, who put us in touch with you.
Yes.
Thanks, Mindy. This has been fantastic. So Mindy and Steve, we love you guys.
Yes, thank you, Mindy and Steve.
All right. Well, any final words, or did we do it?
I think we did it. Just thank you so much. And I'm, so grateful for any opportunity to reframe divorce. Like when your family, if your family finds yourselves at that next step, that it's not a life-defining failure, and that in a lot of cases it is brave, and there is a way to do it with like compassion and dignity, and set everybody up for success.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Yes, we appreciate you.
And Margi, thanks for joining us.
Yes. I'm so glad I was here.
I'm so glad too. Thank
And
you.
Julia, thanks. It was great to have you on today. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a really good story.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julia.
And I'm mindful that like only a fraction of all divorces are going to end in such an idyllic way. So I guess no shame. I guess, and it takes two, right? It takes both being healthy and being in a place where they want. So no shame if this doesn't fit your situation,
Yes,
or if only
over and
parts
over
of this
again.
Yeah.
fits
We
your
acknowledge
situation.
that.
We don't want to say that this is the way, or this is even possible for most people. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that was where I was so adamant about a memoir versus anything self-help, right? This is like an N of one divorce story.
yeah.
But again, just appreciate being able to talk about it because it is so prevalent, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
talk about the continuum, right? Talk about divorce more.
And getting more prevalent, I think. So,
Yeah.
And practicing also, I think, this reframe around it. So just for anyone out there who is, amidst it right now, just all the love and support, no matter what it's looking like.
And get support. I think that's part of it. Like the stigma around it prevents people from reaching out and obtaining like the support and the tools. And I would instead encourage, like, it's so brave to get the support and the help that you need to carry you through like a really rough season, and how awesome to proactively look for something that will help you navigate it in a way that we want to. Yeah.
Did you and your ex-husband both see the same uncoupling coach?
No, only I did.
Okay.
But she was awesome. So she always offers like one session with the spouse or former spouse. And she said almost 99% of the time they'll decline. But he was great. He did meet with her for that one session and her purpose there is to help share some common language, right? Just explain like, this is what I'm working with Meg on. This is where, and so he was great to attend that, but that was just once. And then I worked with her for a while.
And I love that because that models oftentimes the differentiation piece and the letting go of another person's, where they are, what they need, their decisions, and that you're focusing on your own support and what you feel like will help you.
Yeah.
It's that you deserve good support.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That you're worth that. And that's such a difference, right? That's where I learned even this idea of self-compassion, right? Which I felt was so foreign after growing up in the Mormon church. I don't know, maybe that's not fair to attribute to Mormonism, but I was so self-critical, right? Like that was the go-to. And so, it's been life-changing.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today on Mormon Stories. Please like and subscribe to the Mormon Stories podcast YouTube channel. Same on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram. Huge thanks to our donors that make all of this possible. So if you're a monthly donor, annual donor, whatever, thank you. Also, please know that if you value this content, we do need support to continue. So we lose 10 or 20 monthly donors a month. And if we don't replace them, then we have to start cutting back. So if you value this type of content, want to see it continue, and you're not currently a monthly donor, please become a monthly donor at mormonstories.org. Click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. And for as long as we can, we'll keep providing this content. And most importantly, we have some panels. So we are thinking about a divorce panel, just a panel of people to discuss divorce, to kind of allow other people to share their experiences. So if you have experienced a divorce in a Mormon context and are interested in being a part of a panel, reach out. There's a application form for anyone who wants to be on Mormon Stories at mormonstories.org. You can apply, and then we can decide if you could fit that panel. There's other panels we're trying to staff: the young single adult experience or dating experience in the church, infertility panel. We are looking for grandparents who lost their faith as grandparents. Those are always cool stories. We're always looking for like in it to win it, power, devoted couples. We've thought about doing a neurodiversity panel of, autism and or ADHD sort of stuff. There's always different panels we're trying to put together. So check out if you want to be on a panel, or if you've just got a story that you think is really interesting and compelling, just go to mormonstories.org, apply to be on the show, and Margi will decide if you're worthy. Right, Margi? It's all to Margi. If you get rejected, it's her fault.
Great. That's great.
It's all her.
I do look at and appreciate and love everyone. Every video, every submission. So.
All right. Well, be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We'll hope for a day where announcements are sent out for all divorces as a celebration, and a big party ensues where just like there's a beautiful wedding, there's a beautiful divorce party where all the friends and family envelop the separating couple, the divorcing couple and their children with love, and wishing them all well into their next journeys. That's what we're all working for, right?
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. Versus what's happening right now in Utah. All right. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.